Support for this and all the free content of Addressing Gettysburg is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to number 6 of Ask a Gettysburg Guide. My, how the time flies. Of course, I'm here with Bob Steenstra, and we are joined by, hello, Bob.
Hello, Matt.
I always just blow past you.
I know. You do. People don't get to hear my voice, and then they wonder what that voice coming out there.
I know.
By the way, did you kill that fly that you just got with your clapping?
I did. Good. But the thing is...
Because you said time flies, and then you clapped.
Very good. Okay. I clapped first.
That's true.
Yeah, which nobody's going to hear because I cut that out. Anyway, joining us today for this Ask a Guide, for his first Ask a Guide, is Jim Pangburn. Very good. Hello, Jim.
Yes, good morning. I'm excited to have Jim here.
Jim, you may remember from there's a preview on this feed about the March North, and all of our Patreon listeners, of course, know Jim already because they've been listening to the March North episode. Just a couple of things, if you don't mind me getting this out of the way here before we start. Number 1, episode 2 of the narrative episodes has come out. It's called Invasion. June 1863. Came out. I let it out last night.
I listened to it last night driving back from Temple University, and it was awesome.
Let me tell you, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I'm going to. Let me just read you some of my favorite comments from people who like apparently listened to it as soon as they saw that it came out. Okay. These are all Instagram people. Belton's The Best Is Yet, I think is how you say that. Anyway, they say, this is phenomenal work. I just finished listening to part 1 and am amazed at the job performed. I felt as though I was right in the battle and could sense every aspect. Thank you so much for your hard work this week. I enjoyed being able to listen to Matt's talk, meaning Matt Atkinson's talk, lecture. Wasn't able to make it due to work. The quality and effort you are putting forth deserves much praise and appreciation. Truly talented work. Thank you very much.
Can I interject something there?
Sure.
I got to listen to Bert Barnett. Talk yesterday. Mm-hmm. I mean, I couldn't be there because I was taking my granddaughter to Temple, but driving back last night, I got to hear it. Thank you, Matt.
That's right. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, that new mic that you just got.
Thank you, Tattooed Historian, for offering that.
And whoever loaned some money to Addressing Gettysburg temporarily so that we could buy that mic. But it was so cool. The only thing I have a problem with is, and as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to go to Bert. I hope he's working today, and ask him if I can see his file. I'm imagining that
his notes. He had,
not just his notes, the pictures. I want to see the pictures. They must have been cool. Were you there, Jim Pangburn? Were you there yesterday at the Winter Lecture Series?
No, I had a Ford car tour.
Cool.
Yes, in the afternoon. So that's when he was doing the talk. But gosh, I would have loved to have heard it.
Well, you can hear it on the Addressing Gettysburg podcast.
Excellent.
Because it's already up there. It was up there last night already. And the thing is, you're going to want to see it too. Yeah. So I'm going to suggest that maybe you go to Bert and say, hey, can we get the file?
I'm going to start.
Maybe you can post some of those pictures online.
I'm going to start doing that for a number of reasons. But I'm actually going to send out a blanket email to all the Rangers who are or all the it's not just Rangers this year. So all the people who are doing a lecture. Mm-hmm. I'm going to invite them to come on the show. We have Steve Fan or Steve Fawn, depending on who you are. You'd say it differently, but he works down at the Washington Defenses, that national park down there, or Defenses of Washington, whatever they call it. So I invited him on. He has to clear it with his bosses, and I had to submit some questions, and his bosses are going to get back to me. Or going to get back to him and let him know if he can do it. But if he can, he's going to do it right after the lecture.
Great.
So we're going to record the lecture and then come over here and then we're going to talk.
Awesome.
So, and of course you're invited to do that. But yeah, so, and that's another thing. That was the next thing I was going to bring up after I read the comments. And that is that we, as much as possible, because we go to these lectures anyway, at least once a weekend, if not both. Mm-hmm. And so they're not doing video this year to put on YouTube. I think it's a combination of the amount of time it takes to do, because you or I can videotape anything and put it on YouTube and that's it. They have to comply with the ADA, and that means they have to close caption it. And that takes time. And I think it's also, they have to hire somebody to do that. So I think it's a time and a budgetary thing. So, in order to, it's just easier to say, well, we're not going to do it. So I know a lot of people like to watch the YouTube videos of these things. And so I'm going to do the next best thing. I'm not going to do video because video is so time consuming. And I did that for 5 years and I don't really want to do it again unless somebody drops a big pile of money in my lap. So that's not going to happen. So I'm not going to be doing video, but, I am going to do audio. So I bring the recorder there and so far I've recorded 2. There's only 2. It just started this weekend, but we're going to bring those to you and those are going to be absolutely free. And those are brought to you by our patrons over at patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg. So if you want to be one of the cool kids, by all means, go to Patreon. Bob, you're a patron.
I'm a cool kid.
You're a cool kid. You're a patron.
First time in my life, Jim. I'm a cool kid.
You're a patron and you're on the show.
I'm on the show?
Yeah.
How was that?
Well, you're the co-host and yet you still are a patron.
I'm the co-host? Do I get paid for that?
Well, you're either the co-host or you're the guy who keeps showing up every time there's a show.
Because you keep saying, hey, Bob, can I do this? And I say no. Do you remember the first couple times I said no, and no?
Twisting your arm. Up. I knew you would like it. I just knew, I had to force you into it. Anyway, other comment here. History with Brad. Guys, he's sharing this on his Instagram. He says, guys.
Hold on. Can I just point out that you said you had to force me into it and you were about to ask a question about forcing people into something they don't want to do. Go ahead. Ask the question.
Say what?
You'll get it in a minute. You're a little slow. Just ask the question. Okay. Forcing people into doing something they don't want to do, like you forced me into doing this. Go. Ask the question.
I don't have a question.
Yes, you do. You were about to read the first question.
No, I'm reading a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I haven't finished my comment. You derailed me on my comment. Here, let me finish.
Less caffeine next time.
Yeah, really. Try whiskey next time. Guys, check out this podcast by Addressing Gettysburg. It has been hailed as generation defining, audibly stunning, and a directorial masterpiece. Wow. You can also hear yours truly doing a voiceover. Link in my bio. So, of course, he's promoting his own voice there, but he is true about everything that they said. I can't remember if it was Entertainment Weekly or Mad Magazine that defined the show that way, but it was one of them. Okay, Civil War Soldiers History says, just a heads up for those listening tonight or tomorrow, it is an amazing episode. Matt has shown great skill in compiling this first part. He improves on things that needed it and pushed further on those that were already great. The additional sound and voiceovers bring it to life. Sit back, relax, close your eyes, and you will be transported back. Addressing Gettysburg is the Ken Burns of Civil War podcasts.
How much did you pay him for that?
That was about $200 for that one. Yeah. So, but thank you guys for all of that stuff. And that's about it, I believe. Yes. Okay. So into our questions now. We have some questions. These are some pretty good ones here. And I like this first one because
it's about forcing people into doing something they don't want to do.
Yes. And he also sources it.
Yes. That was impressive.
Which I like. It's Ricky Fowler, 63. He tees off with this great one. Alexander Webb states in a 1904 interview with James Kelly that he put his sword through one of his own men during Longstreet's assault. Are there any known instances of officers taking corrective action during the battle or campaign? And the source on Webb is Kelly's notes found in William Stiples or Stipples?
Stiple, I think.
Stiples Generals in Bronze, page 151. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I haven't encountered any specific instances of that, but I've heard about it in general. Typically in combat, there were officers posted to the rear, and I've heard that if somebody lost courage and tried to head to the rear, that they would often feel the broadside of a sword across their back. So there were guys called file closers and so forth that was their job, was to stay in the rear of a battle line, and if somebody tried to break and run, hit him across the back with a sword. But that seems pretty extreme that Webb would have actually stab somebody, but that's kind of unusual.
Yeah. Oh, now, would they? It wasn't like in the Russian army, what is that? Enemy at the Gates, where the Russian armies, the officers are back there behind in Stalingrad with the machine gun, and so like either way you run, you're going to get shot.
Yeah,
it wasn't that way, right?
I never. I mean,
on the whole.
Yeah. And we might have seen more of that earlier in the war when people's resolve might not have been as great as it is here at Gettysburg. I've always thought that here at Gettysburg, you're still in the Army.
Right.
After 2 years in the war, you believe what you're fighting in. You've had your chances to get away, to desert.
Right. But if you're here, by the time you're here, you pretty much have. I mean, you believe what you're
fighting for. Yeah.
Or you're just so downtrodden from the experience of war that you're just like, what the hell, doesn't matter. I'll stay here. And
I haven't seen too many instances of that. The web source is very unusual, but it was a critical moment in the battle, and Webb felt like if you allow one guy to start running, then it gets contagious, right? You have a real problem,
right?
Absolutely.
Now, was it? I think it was on the last Ask a Guy that we did with Lewis that he mentioned, we were talking about Barlow, and that Lewis kind of said as an aside that he was a fan of using the flat end of his sword.
Yeah,
so Barlow was kind of one of those guys who would he wasn't a file closer per se, but he would. And then there's stories of who was it? Was it Hancock? No, it wasn't Hancock. Someone, maybe it was Howard. But when Howard's line is collapsing at Chancellorsville, there's some account of someone whacking the guys with the flat end of his sword, trying to get them to stop retreating.
I can't cite anything for you, but that certainly wouldn't surprise given the situation.
Yeah. Okay. No, wait. You have headphone problems?
Not anymore.
It came back.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, but this Webb instance is pretty extreme. I don't know about you, Bob, but I've never really heard about that. Actually stabbing a guy. I mean, you need these guys. Right. You need their firepower. You stab a guy, you just inflicted a casualty.
Yeah.
You want to do what you can to get the guys back in line, but to disable one of your own men, of course, he probably did it by example.
Yeah. So a sergeant in the 14th Virginia named Dennis Easley ends up writing a story called "With Armistead When He Was Killed." Early on, now I'm going to be quoting from a book called Pickett's Charge: Eyewitness Accounts from Rank and File Publishing, 1994. And I'm just going to do part of what he has to say. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He says, I was sergeant in Company H, 14th Virginia Infantry, and before starting in a charge, our captain specified 3 or 4 men who were habitual, quote, playouts, and instructed the file closers to, quote, take them into the fight or kill them, end quote. He didn't care which. And if we killed them, he would be responsible. Okay, so the captain's responsible, not the sergeant. I selected an old schoolmate, as he had done more talking and less fighting than anyone in the company. We did not go far before he claimed to be wounded, but when I insisted on seeing the wound, he got up and ran. Finally, he dived through the space between the 14th and the 57th Virginia and ran down the front of the 57th. I saw Sergeant Garner cock his gun and run down the rear of the 57th Regiment. And then he doesn't say what happened to the guy, but he was apparently trying to kill him as a skirker there.
So they're on either side of the line,
and the other guy's chasing him down.
The sergeant's chasing him from the back.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now I went to the guide library this morning and saw a tremendous guide who's been on the force for a long time. And I was just delighted to see him because I asked him this question, and I was doing some research. I wanted to get official numbers on Daniel's brigade for a later question. Mm-hmm. And he quickly, off the top of his head, told me 3 stories regarding this type of thing. Uh-huh. Yeah, and he was the one who said, well, there was that one of Sergeant Easley, and okay, that I could find, no problem. But he also told me, and I haven't, in the short time I've had, been able to track these 2 down. He says that there was a boy from the 59th New York. Now, for those of you listening, you know where the clump of trees is.
That's one of the ones we adopted.
Okay, right. And the 59th New York is just south of the clump of trees, right on the wall, on the front line. This was Hall's brigade. of Gibbon's division of Hancock's Second Corps. So we're right at the high water mark, okay?
Right next to the 69th PA, which is
just
an
south
obelisk.
of the 59th PA, correct. Now that space during the actual attack is being covered, I think it's about a 200-yard front, by Cowan's Battery, whose monument is closer to the road, a little bit further east, south of the clump of trees, but that's the space that was covering. So this is apparently a soldier from the 59th New York is running backwards. I mean, he's running through his lines because of the attack. Okay, so he's retreating.
Yeah, okay.
And according to this guide, a gunner from the 59th New York, or someone from Cowan's Battery, the artillery battery that's in support there, takes a coffee pot and hits him on the top of the head to get him to stop. And the bottom of the coffee pot broke, and it just kind of sat like a hat on this guy's head, and he kept running away. So that's not quite as extreme as what Webb said, piercing a guy with a sword. Yeah. But that's kind of funny, and it's about the same period of time, I'm sure.
That's funny.
And then this guide said, and thank you, guide, if you're listening to this, you know who you are. This guide said, and he was upset with himself that he couldn't come up with the chapter and verse. And so when I left the library, he had pulled out the book on the 15th Alabama regimental history, and he was trying quick to find out so I could have the name. But he says that there was a captain in the 15th Alabama. Of course, for those of you Gettysburg aficionados, you know that this is the regiment fighting against the 20th Maine at Little Round Top.
Right.
And he had a shirker by the scruff of the neck. I guess he had the uniform in the back of his neck. And he was just walking towards the front with this guy hanging on. He must have had a pretty strong grip, dragging this guy along. And a bullet hits and kills the guy.
Kills the soldier?
Kills the shirker. Yeah. And he just lets go of his grip, and the body crumples. And according to the guide, the captain said something like, "There, I guess you won't be running now."
Jeez. God.
So, I mean, he didn't kill the man. But it is a kind of a dark side that we don't often talk about. But there are those people behind the lines whose job it is to enforce the discipline.
Right. Because after all, these are human beings, not saints.
Absolutely.
And they're man is good and evil.
Right.
Okay. Well, you just mentioned Little Round Top. Somebody in the live thing here has a question. And I know you guys didn't prepare this, but this is an easy one. I think it's more of an opinion, I guess. Which is more important, Culp's Hill and Cemetery Ridge, or Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, East Cemetery Hill, or Little Round Top? Which would you say?
Where did this guy's relative fight?
I think they're equally important.
Okay.
Maybe that's a cop-out, but one of my colleagues, who's a retired Special Forces colonel, was giving us a seminar years ago on how to give staff rides to the military. And I think I mentioned him on the March North that we did the podcast, Kevin Cobbinair. And he talked about the importance of logistics, and he talked about the roads that come in and out of Gettysburg. 10 to 12 roads come in and out all different directions, like the spokes of a wheel. And at the beginning of the second day, the Union Army only controlled 3 of those roads. Now, it was the Emmitsburg Road, the Taneytown Road, and the Baltimore Pike. On the second day, when Longstreet attacks, he crosses the Emmitsburg Road, captures the Peach Orchard and Devil's Den, and now the Emmitsburg Road is behind Confederate lines. You only have 2 roads. And I remember one thing he said, and I use this on tours all the time. He said, if you got a 100,000-man army, hundreds of cannons and thousands of wagons, and you've only got one road to get in and out of Gettysburg, supplies coming in, retreat going out, you're going to get bottlenecked. I always say, go down to Washington, D.C. on a Friday afternoon around 5 o'clock.
Right.
You see what I'm getting at, the Beltway?
Yeah.
It's bottleneck.
It's a nightmare.
Right. So you got to keep at least 2 roads open at all times. If you don't have 2 roads, you can't stay there.
One in, one out.
Right. So what I'm getting at is Little Round Top on the southern end of the Union line controls the Taneytown Road. I think that was the real value of Chamberlain not letting the Confederates 15th Alabama get around him. Because if he does, they get on the Taneytown Road, the Baltimore Pike's the only other road. Culp's Hill on the other side of the Union line commands the Baltimore Pike. So that's really the value of those 2 hills on either end of the Union line, is they command these vital supply lines and potential.
So they're equally important,
in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. Good question.
The Baltimore Pike was a more important road, it could be argued, because it goes to Baltimore and then to Washington.
Right.
And it was a more improved road than the Taneytown Road.
It was the main supply line. That's
right.
True.
It was main north-south road. So an argument could be made for maybe Culp's Hill was, I'm not denying what Kevin said. I mean, it's absolutely true. You need both. And it isn't so much one in, one out. It's if you need to retreat and fall back on your capital, you need both of those roads. Mm-hmm. Because you're going to lose a good part of your army in that traffic jam. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you need both of those roads to get out of there. But an argument can be made, and I know if Charlie Fennell was here, one of our guides, he would make this argument, I think, that Culp's Hill is the more important of the two because the Baltimore Pike is the more important of the two. And Culp's Hill is, guarding the Baltimore Pike more.
Because it's a direct line to the capital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And early visitors to the battlefield, and Charlie mentioned this to us once before. I don't know if you've aired that episode or not. But Charlie mentioned to us that the first visitors to the battlefield were attracted to Culp's Hill.
Yes.
Not Little Round Top. For other reasons.
Yeah.
Because the trees were all shredded.
Yeah. It's a little easier to see there was a fight.
Yeah, right.
Which I don't understand. Why wouldn't it have been easy to see? They missed all the trees on Little Round Top? Like fighting around the 20th Main?
Well,
like nobody hit a tree?
Well, no, that's not true. In fact, but there was a small, like a 3 or 4 inch tree that was shorn down at the 20th Main's line during the fight at Little Round Top, but it wasn't that big.
No, but it was worse.
And the western side of the hill was already clear to trees. Yeah, it was much worse at Culp's Hill. Because it was a longer fight. The whole hill was a longer fight, and the whole hill was wooded. Yeah. And the guys were fighting at night at the night of July 2nd, so they couldn't see. They
probably were hitting more trees over there.
But I'm not sure that question would have resonated or surprised people. An answer that says Culp's Hill maybe, or at least equal, if it wasn't for Killer Angels and the movie Gettysburg.
Right,
and I'm not trying to downplay those things. Those are cool.
Well, I'm sure.
But Little Round Top has more attention. I'm imagining
I'm imagining he's thinking about what fighting was more important because of that. But I think the answers that you guys gave was good because it's less movie and more reality. Like you got to have those roads. It's not. You know what I mean? Like it's a cooler scene visually in the movie to see Chamberlain charging down against the Confederates, but the reality is you got to hold that hill because you got to hold the roads.
Yeah. Another argument sort of for Little Round Top is it's in the way of the main attack of the Confederates on July 2nd. I mean, the assault against Culp's Hill is not the main thrust of the Confederate forces on the 2nd of July.
Right. Okay. All right. Oh, go ahead, Johan.
Well, I was just going to add that, and I had a guy say this just the other day on a tour. People always say, wow, if the Confederates had captured Little Round Top, they could have brought their artillery up there and they would have shot right down the Union line along Cemetery Ridge. But the problem with that is it's not a good artillery position, Little Round Top, if you can't get artillery up there in the first place. And when you look at where the Confederates are coming from, Big Round Top, which is wooded, rocky hill, it would have been extremely difficult for the Confederates to get guns up there in any timely fashion.
Right.
But Culp's Hill also wasn't a great artillery position.
Was not.
Culp's Hill was not a great artillery.
No,
neither one of them were.
Right. That's right.
Okay, this might surprise your listener and might be interesting to ask Jim this question. Of the 3 hills that comprise the fishhook, in my book, Cemetery Hill is the most important hill.
Sure.
Because it was like a battleship. It was a ready-made artillery platform.
Yeah. Right.
It was a much more gradual slope. It had 2 major roads going over it and another going at the base, which makes it easy to get and supply guns. It had no, or not very many anyway, trees on it. So
it's interesting. Yesterday at Burt Barnett's lecture yesterday, he during the Q&A portion of it, I forgot what the question was, but he said if I were king for a day, I would get rid of the trees in the cemetery because that was an artillery platform, and nobody can understand that now because of all the trees. And I applauded because I was like, yeah, absolutely, get rid of that because you can get a peek through some of the trees when you stand there, and then you can see, oh, look there's the peace light. Yes, you can see all the way out.
Right, like and the seminary buildings you can see today through a couple of angles. You just keep looking off in that northwest direction, folks, next time you're there. and you'll see through a break in some of the trees, or in the winter you can see it better. You can see it better.
Well, there are a lot of them are evergreens, so you can't.
Well, that's true. That's part of the problem.
Yeah.
But it was mostly a treeless hill, even though there is a witness tree, even living still today at the cemetery. The other thing I'd ask the listeners to do next time you're here is to go through the cemetery. Now, when you go through, most people are focused on the graves and the dead and the story of the Gettysburg Address, rightly so. But if you just visit it twice and do that after you've visited the field, walk through it first, just looking at all the artillery monuments and the guns that are there. And know that the typical Union battery is 6 guns. So when you see 2 with a monument, it's probably more like 5 or 6 guns that are represented by those 2.
And but you can also get a really good idea of the view from East Cemetery Hill.
Yes, good point.
Because go across the Baltimore Pike and stand out there, and it's a little less Well, there are no trees in your immediate front blocking your view, and you can see the peace light all the way out on the first day's battlefield and all that other stuff. The only thing that would be different is the buildings you see right in front of you weren't there for the most part for a good
if you're
distance,
looking north.
Right? If you're looking, yeah.
Right. If you're looking east, though, the park has done a good job since in the 30 years I've been here of clearing out a bunch of the trees. So if you look due east,
that's one of my favorite views too.
Yeah, it really is cool.
It's so pretty down there, that little valley there, or whatever the hell that is. Dell? Is it a dell? Is that what a dell is? What is a dell? And why is the farmer in it?
I think it's like a meadow.
A meadow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anyway, so Belton's the best as yet sends a question in. She or he says, "Forgive me if this question has been asked. I am playing catch up on the podcasts. When it comes to studying weapons used during the Battle of Gettysburg, other than getting out of the car, which we know is the best method, what other suggestions do you have? For example, books, journals, after action reports, etc. Doesn't have to be your next podcast, just looking for some input." So I guess they're asking, besides like getting out of the car and examining a cannon to really get an idea of it, what are good, do you have any good resources?
Can I address that real quick though? I'm going to let Jim handle this mostly, but you just said get out of the car, and other than get out of a car and look at a cannon. Right. So this is a book which one of our guides wrote. It's called Silent Sentinels by George Newton. It's a reference guide to the artillery at Gettysburg. And it was published by, hang on, I've got to see who published this. Boring. Savas Beatty.
Boring, just you're not saying the book.
No, the book's not boring, just because I didn't have that right at the tip of my tongue.
Right.
But that is kind of a you drive around guide. Drive to this spot, get out, look at the cannons here, and we'll show you. We'll teach you different things about it. Would you agree, Jim? That's not a bad resource to
Absolutely,
do.
yeah. And then one of our other colleagues, Phil Cole, did a book on Artillery Gettysburg as well.
Yeah, that was Da Capo Press, the Phil Cole's book, Da Capo Press, Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Capo Da Capo?
DACAPO in 2002.
How about, didn't Wittenberg do artillery at Gettysburg? Did you guys read that?
He did the cavalry.
No, I think he did artillery too.
It could be.
I have it. I think it's Wittenberg. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's or no, it might be Gottfried. Are you familiar with either one of these? These ringing any bells? Okay, don't worry about it then. I'll check it later.
What else were you going to say, Jim?
Well, as far as artillery goes, there's the museum at the Gettysburg National Military Park that has cannon barrels on display vertically along some of the support posts as you're going through the hallway near the entrance to the cyclorama, the film. And as far as small arms weapons go, same thing. The museum at Gettysburg has an awful lot of small arms on display in the hallways, free. Not in the museum that you have to pay a ticket for, but right in the hallways. And then there's a fellow here in Gettysburg that ran a publishing business you might be familiar with. It was called Thomas Publications, Dean Thomas. And he wrote a couple of paperback books years ago on small arms. Which
in fact, one of them was called Ready, Aim, Fire. Small Arms at Gettysburg, 1981, from Thomas Publications.
Okay. Remember the old visitor center, that giant room that they had full of all those guns?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, downstairs?
Yeah. I think it was downstairs. Yeah. Yeah. That was great. I used to love that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. So many guns.
Yeah.
And they still have a lot of them, but
on display,
I mean, it's
right.
like a fraction. It's just scratching the surface of what they actually, assuming they kept them all, what they actually have in their possession. That was so great. I used to love to come in and see that.
You know what I like about the old visitor center?
What?
The Jim, you'll probably remember this, although maybe not. Maybe it wasn't working anymore. But early on in my tenure of guiding, when you first went through the old visitor center and go to the right, there was this room with these panels that would lit up with little silhouettes of soldiers, infantry soldiers, and cannons and horse soldiers. And they would do a little program that lasted about 10 minutes or so, where they would introduce you to, hi, this is a company. At first they'd light up just one soldier and say, hi, this is a private soldier from this company. And this is my group of men that's a company. And they'd light up like 35 of these guys, which is the average company size of 33, 35. Right. And then they'd say, you put 10 of us companies together and we would make a regiment, and they would light up 10 companies. And now you've got the 350 or so regiment, and they would have blue on one side, red on the other. And they would go through and they'd build regiments into brigades and brigades into divisions and divisions into corps. And then you'd have, like almost 93,000 little guys lit up for the North in blue, and 70 or 75,000 Confederates lit up in red. And then they'd introduce how many horses, and they'd have the cavalry come in, and how many guns were here. And, so you had these little cannons lighting up it was so cool. So you were in this room that was totally surrounded by red and blue figurines, and you got a visual sense of how many soldiers were here, and how cool this was. And then they would black out a whole bunch of them. Yeah. And this is how many were left. These were the casualties. It was really, but the trouble was, it was early 1990s, I guess. Maybe it was started in the 1980s. And the technology just wasn't there, and it kept breaking down. And they eventually took it away. But it was so cool when it worked. Speaking
of old technology in the old visitor center, so Bert's talk yesterday was about memorialization and commemoration and all that stuff, or his lecture. And one of the things that came up towards the end was the electric map. And the lady sitting next to me happens to be friends with the guy who currently owns the old electric map. And it's out in Hanover. And he's trying to get it so that he can have the public come in and see it again. He has it all working. He has the old audio, the lights, everything works. It's all back together again. But we got to talking about it, and I said, but you do I would love to see it again. I said, but you do realize that if you take a 10-year-old today and bring him to the electric map, he's going to go, the hell are you bringing to me? This is, what is this? We want to see it because we have nostalgia attached to it. And so, but it's not going, everybody's all excited about it coming back, but all those people were over 50. I mean, I'm excited too, because I have nostalgia attached to it as well, but still, my point is that certain things don't translate down the generations.
Correct. Although I liked it. I remember it well when I first came here.
Yeah.
You remember it, Jim?
That was the first thing I did before I ever went in the battlefield.
Went out there, yeah.
And it made such a difference.
Yeah.
I had such a frame of reference and a general idea before you actually went in the battlefield. So when you actually went in the battlefield, things made a little bit more sense. You could understand things a little bit quicker. Yeah, I love the electric.
Yeah.
But the park said that the kids were referring to it as the electric nap.
Yeah. And that's what I used to call it to my kids. I hate to say this because I really did like it.
Yeah.
And
I loved it.
But as a teacher, I think I've mentioned this before, but I used to march my 8th grade students about 11 miles from New Oxford Middle School, where we taught, to Gettysburg, so that we would know what it would be like to be soldiers.
And then you would camp out, right?
And then we camped out in tents on the battlefield.
Yeah. I wish I had a teacher like you. I had a couple pretty good history teachers, but none of them were that cool.
That's pretty cool.
We'd eat Civil War food. We'd have reenactors come and park rangers come and fellow guides come to put on presentations for the kids. And then the last thing we'd have is a ghost storyteller, and we'd put them to bed. But then the next morning, the first thing we would do, we would go to the electric nap.
After just waking up.
Yeah, it wasn't the best thing to do first thing in the morning. And, but it was cool.
Well, I remember it had to be 2000s because I was down at George Mason at the time. So it was like 2000. I went out, I was a volunteer at Manassas, and their electric map had all, I remember it was put in the 90s, and it was like fiber optics, which was like the big thing. And so when they're talking about, a column going down the road, this red column would move down the road.
Our electric map used to do that too.
No, not like this. It was more fluid. I mean, it was pretty neat. It was different. It was different than the one. It was just like a whole bunch of lights. Basically, there were lights all over the map, little tiny lights.
They went faster.
They were smaller. And so if it was like two battle lines, you'd have your red, your blue line, and they'd face each other. But then all these tinier lights in between them would indicate fire going back and forth. Yeah. So, and I always said, like, well, Gettysburg is a much bigger, more popular battlefield. Why their electric map like this? Why don't they upgrade it? I never understood that.
Well, in a sense, we have something even better. We have a 3D copy of, I think it's the Cope map, isn't it? That leans up against the wall at the current visitor center.
Yeah, over toward the resource center on the north side of the battlefield.
And I think most
visitor center.
Right. And most people don't see it.
Yeah.
They'll exit the museum from the rear exit. They come in from the front exit. And they'll probably just walk right by it towards the bathrooms to the right or towards the bookstore.
Right.
But as you go past that resource center, there's this big, huge, square, three-dimensional map that was very well done by an engineer named Cope. And it is a great three-dimensional representation of the battlefield.
It's kind of the electric map before it became electric.
Right. Yeah, and sometimes I'll take a laser, and if I have some groups, it kind of serves as the electric map. Mm-hmm. It used to be at the old Cyclorama Center, and I used to do it there sometimes too if I met people that hadn't gone to the electric map.
Yeah. No, it is cool.
How did we get on the electric map? Was that one of your listeners?
I don't remember.
Your live listeners?
No, we went on some tangents and stuff. But let's get back to the questions here because they work so hard
to get question?
I don't remember that either. It was the one about
studying weaponry.
Yes.
Oh, weaponry. Yeah.
I mentioned the museum at Gettysburg is a great place to see.
Oh, that's how we got on it.
But I'll tell you another place. If you've never been there, it's one of my favorite museums. Have you ever heard of Pamplin Park outside Petersburg, Virginia? And they have a wonderful museum. You can get a headset and you go through the museum and different displays are numbered and you punch the numbers in and they play a little audio in your headset on what that is. So you don't have to listen to everything. But one of my favorite displays at Pamplin Park and I use here at Gettysburg is we talk about the bombardment prior to Pickett's charge. And they have this vertical light display on a wall. And on the one side, it's what it's showing you is the difference between rifled artillery against something like Pickett's charge and massed Napoleonic infantry assault and smoothbore.
Oh, so the ranges are showing up?
Yeah, so you have this board on a wall, and on the right side vertically, you have these lights, and that's the attacking column. On the opposite side, the left side of the vertical display, all lights, is the target area, the defenders. And so they start the program the first time they do it against the old Napoleonic smoothbores, which are limited in range. So you see the attacking lights coming from right to left across the field, and they get about halfway across the field, and all of a sudden you start to see these lights go out. That's the casualties from the smoothbore. And then they do it a second time. The second time they're doing it against the rifle artillery. And as soon as the lights on the right, the attacking line starts to move to the left. The lights start going out just immediately. So by the time they get to the far left, there's no lights left. And it really shows you the difference between the mass Napoleonic infantry assault against the old Napoleon weapons, back in the early European days, as opposed to what's happening now. You got Lee, who had studied Napoleonic tactics, making a mass Napoleonic infantry assault against black rifle cannons. And the difference, and it helps, I think one of the things that helps explain why Pickett's charge was defeated.
Did they also show the range of the musketry then? Because
it was just an artillery demonstration.
But that would be really interesting to put in with rifled muskets too.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great museum.
That is cool.
Which one is that?
Pamplin Park outside Petersburg.
Oh, okay.
I think they opened it in like the mid-'90s. It's still fairly new.
So it's a new one.
Yeah, and they bought land actually where actual earthworks were, where breakthrough occurred right before Lee began to retreat toward Appomattox. So it's a really neat place.
Yeah.
Tell us one more time the name of the park and where it is.
Pamplin, Pamplin, outside Petersburg.
Just say it. Don't spell it.
Pamplin.
No, say the whole name of the thing and then the city it's in.
Pamplin Park.
Matt loves what he calls plosives. He loves the letter P in a microphone.
I wonder what you're doing to me there. Thanks for explaining.
But
you'll have to listen to our podcast on the making of Addressing Gettysburg to understand this inside joke here about the plosives of Matt.
Back to your, and then we're going to move on. Back to the question, or when we were talking about, question? No, when we were talking about you marching the kids and camping out and everything like that. And then you would go take them in the morning to the electric map. And one of our viewers here says, then for lunch, the students had hardtack and salt pork. Any kid who turned to go back to school was smacked with the broadside of a sword.
I love that. Thank you. Hey, by the way, we did feed the kids hardtack that they had made at school.
Oh, really?
It was an assignment. And we gave them a Civil War meal at night, which was probably a nice Civil War meal. It was beef stew, bread, and apples.
That sounds good to me.
But just water. I mean, we were trying to let them rough it,
Right.
I think that's great that you did that, Bob, but I credit your school district for allowing you to do it.
Yeah,
the Oxford
absolutely.
School District. That's really cool that they let you do that.
Yeah. Dave Teets was my administrator when I first had the idea. Any other administrator would see all sorts of problems.
Yeah.
But he
That's
said
what I'm
something like,
thinking,
what's the worst that could happen? And I'm thinking, well, some kid could get killed by a car as we're marching there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
He said, let's see what happens. And it was great. The television, local news covered it. The local newspaper covered it. The local radio station at the time covered it. I ended up eventually getting an award from the Hanover Chamber of Commerce as being Educator of the Year after doing this a number of years too. It doesn't belong to me. It was my whole team. Can you imagine how good my team teachers were?
Sure. Yeah,
they had to do it too.
Yeah.
And we had to plan to move 100 to 150 kids all the way to Gettysburg.
That's awesome.
And anyway, it was quite the logistical thing.
Gettysburg resource, and it's great that you're able to take advantage of it, but I'll bet you those kids today are still talking about it.
They do.
Oh, absolutely.
Sometimes when they see me at a restaurant, I'm like, Mr. Steenstra, the best thing I ever did was
some of your former students, and they love Bob. They love Bob.
Oh, so
and that just is the story you just told there is a good lesson for people who automatically assume that their idea isn't going to work. If you hadn't been pulling on the teat, you wouldn't have gotten that permission.
Did he say? He said that because my principal's name is Dave Teets, and he just wanted to work there.
We'll let you get away with
He's so proud of himself right now. Hey, I want to give a little plug for a national park ranger who used to do programs for us. And when we did that, I say used to, she might still do it for New Oxford Middle School. I don't know. I'm just retired a few years ago. But Barb Sanders.
Barb.
She would do amputations for us over where we were camping at night. She would do amputations.
I remember you got sued for that.
No, but she did make one of our kids faint. She is so good at the description. She's talking about the blood vessels when you cut them off curling up, and you got to get in there and pull them out quick so you can tie them off before they curl up inside the leg.
Yeah.
And she actually made one of my kids.
Yeah, I just talked to her the other day because I've been after her for months to come in and do an episode about medical, but she's always like, "Oh, I'm going to. I just, I got so much stuff going on." And I said, "Yeah, I understand.
Her husband's retired, but not her.
Right, right.
Her husband is also famous. He's been a guest here before.
Also trying to get him back on again. But anyway, let's move on here. We are so tangential today. Quinn 2477. I was reading about the 24th Michigan versus the 26th North Carolina and the high casualty rate. In that specific encounter, it talks about the very high casualty rate of color bearers on both sides. Are there any statistics regarding the casualty rate of color bearers at Gettysburg? I'm assuming since they'd be prime targets, it would be high. What do we know about that? The casualty rate among color bearers? Or, if not in the whole battle, then at least in that 24th Michigan versus 26th North Carolina.
Well, color bearers were very important. Your flag, you use your flag to indicate to the entire regiment your direction of march. And Civil War combat is very confusing. There's a lot of smoke in the field. It's difficult to see. Your flag is in the middle of your line. If you see it going forward, you know to move forward. You see it falling to the rear, it's time to head to the rear. You're probably going to become a prisoner or worse. So only the bravest were considered for the honor of carrying the flag in the middle of the line because they became the targets of the enemy. Knowing how important they were primary targets. And you had the color guard who would march along with the flag bearer. When the flag bearer went down, then they pick up the flag and begin to carry it on.
Was the color guard always Company F?
I don't know.
I think they might have been made up from all sorts of places, but I think Company F was the closest company to the center of the line.
In line.
You're right.
Okay.
And I think it was either corporals or sergeants only that were allowed to be in the color guard. I think it might have been 8 people officially designated.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that if there's no one in the color guard left, other people would pick it up and advance.
Right. Okay.
The greatest honor was to capture an enemy flag. Most medals of honors won at Gettysburg were for the capture of flags. Even if it meant simply seeing a discarded flag on the field, at least one medal of honor. Somebody saw a flag, picked it up off the field, came off the field, got a medal of honor. And the greatest disgrace was to lose your flag. What's interesting about this question is the 24th Michigan and the 26th North Carolina fought in the Herbst Woods on day one.
Right.
Those two units have the highest number of casualties in each of the armies.
Yeah.
24th Michigan brought like close to 500 men into the fight, which was their first real battle. They'd been in Chancellorsville 2 months before, but they really weren't engaged.
Okay.
And in the Herbst Woods on day one, the next day, after the fight in the Herbst Woods, 99 guys answered the roll call. I think the official casualty total on the monument is like 363. 26 North Carolina, number one out of 250 Confederate regiments. In the Battle of Gettysburg, the biggest battle in this half of the world, they lost about 600 out of 800 men. Now, some of those occurred 2 days later during Pickett's
I was going to say,
but the vast majority were day one.
Yeah, most of them were day one. So, I've often told people this when we're in the Herbst Woods. Does this give you some idea of how intense the fighting was? Because you've got the 26th North Carolina Regiment directly across the street from the 24th Michigan. These are the top 2 regimental casualty totals for the whole battle.
Yeah.
And this is just on the first day of the Herbst Woods.
It's just the beginning.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. It was amazing.
That's amazing. And you've said this before, Bob, where you basically kind of marvel at, like, I don't think people realize just how much, how hard of a fight the first day was. It doesn't get enough credit.
I will sometimes say the beaches of Normandy were not as bloody as the 30 minutes of combat that took place here, roughly from 3 to 3:30 or so in the afternoon of July 1st.
Wow.
Between the 26th North Carolina and the 24th Michigan.
Yeah. That's crazy.
It's a very small, at one point, the 2 regiments were about 20 paces from each other. Now, they didn't stay in that relative position very long. The 26th North Carolina, a bigger regiment, is pushing the 24th Michigan back out of the woods of Herbst Woods, or Reynolds Woods, as it's called today by many people.
Right.
I have a book. I'd like to just read a little bit if that's okay.
Hang on. Before you do that, though, I have a follow-up question to the flag question. For people who are new to the whole subject and maybe are coming to it from more of a modern perspective, as far as maybe they were into war movies and stuff like that, but it was always World War II and Vietnam, and they don't carry flags into battle in those movies and in those wars. Why with the flags? What's the point of the flags?
Direction of movement, being able to see them. They're high, they're large, they're the center of the line. So you can always look to the flag for, where's the unit going. You got to remember, it's really smoky on those battlefields. It's very confusing. And in the Herbst Woods, you got the trees as well.
Much smokier than the modern battlefield.
Sure.
And modern soldiers would have electronic radio communication.
That's the difference.
Right.
They didn't have that.
So it was the
Civil War.
I mean, it was unit morale, but it was also communication. It was an easy thing to see in the thick of
get an idea of your direction, because you've got officers behind you giving orders, but it's so loud in the battlefield it's difficult to hear those guys. But you can always look to the flag in the middle of your line to get an idea where you should be going,
because the flag's going to be somewhere near the colonel who's given the order to make them. Yeah,
and they're up high, and you should be able to see them through the smoke.
And then on the same token, a lot of people, and this is just anecdotal from conversations I've had with people who are new to the whole thing, but drummer boys and buglers, people think that they're and with the flags, they think that they're just kind of ornamental pageantry type things to have, that they don't serve an actual purpose, but they do too, and it's along the lines of the flag. What is the purpose of the drummer boys and the buglers?
And don't pass up, you said morale effect. It's the emotional heart and soul of the unit.
Right.
Was it Armistead? Was it Armistead or Mayo or someone? I think it was the 57th color bearer before Pickett's charge, who said, "Are you going to put those colors on that wall?" And if you could put the color of your regiment on that position, that means you have won. And of course, your whole regiment is following. I'm thinking of the Wheatfield, Colonel Harrison Jeffords, 4th Michigan Regiment. His flag is going to be falling in the Wheatfield fight, late in the fight. and he is going to run for it, and some Confederate's going to run for it, and they're going to be wrestling for it for a little bit. A few weeks, I think it was maybe just 2 weeks earlier, he had received that new flag from some dignitary. I think it was the senator, and he had promised that he would defend that flag. And often the flags, not in the case of the 4th Michigan here at the wheat field, but often they were made by the women of the town and presented in a big ceremony as the men were marching off to war. Mm-hmm. And so it was, all of that stuff that you're thinking about home and why are you doing this? I mean,
so it is like a direct link to home because people back home made it for you.
Right. Yeah. And Armistead will say for your homes, for your heart, for your sweethearts or something like that, for your hearts. Yeah. Right. And he's reckoning back to home, and the flag carries that with it. So when you're at Gettysburg and you see some of these advanced markers, like at the angle of Pickett's charge, they didn't make it over the wall like Armistead did. But the 26th North Carolina, the one we're talking about here in the question, there is a little advanced marker showing supposedly the monument was put up in the 1980s and there's no veterans alive anymore, right, who can attest to it. But supposedly that's how far the 26th North Carolina carried that flag. I think his name was Daniel Boone Thomas, who was captured there. But Can I do something with the question was about?
Sure.
So a guy named Rod Gregg, a Southerner, wrote a book a number of years ago called Covered with Glory. It's the 26th North Carolina Infantry at the Battle of Gettysburg. And I'm just going to read some parts of it. I'm on page 126 to begin with. Now, as I was reading this book, and it's been a number of years since I first read it, I was writing in the column the number of color bearers going down. Okay. Oh. So I'm picking up here with number 7, which will already give you an indication of how bad this is. There's already been 6 other color bearers before this one.
Right. Okay.
All right. And so I'm just going to jump around a little bit.
You said the 6 other color bearers that have fallen already.
Have fallen already.
In the book.
This is the account of number 7 going down, okay, in the book. Mm-hmm. The soldiers of the 26th, go ahead.
I was going to say, don't just sit down. Don't jump around while you read it. We won't understand you. Okay, never mind.
I got you. Up the slope they advanced, yard by yard, moving, firing, reloading, moving, firing, reloading. Like men pushing their way through a fierce storm, they headed slowly, steadily, past the battle-scarred trees, over the bodies of the dead and wounded, up the wooded slope of McPherson's Ridge. Burgoyne, by the way, he's the colonel commanding. He's like 20 years old, I think, Jim, something like that.
He was 21 here at Gettysburg. Henry King Burgoyne Jr. Yeah.
Burgoyne brought the regiment to within 20 yards of the enemy's second line, which belched forth volley after volley of gunfire. The soldiers of the 26th stoically faced the front and returned the fire, closing ranks to fill the huge gaps torn in the line. The regiment's battle standard, that's what we're talking about now, right? Mm-hmm. Now, with the splintered staff, was still held high at the center of the line, but it was raised at increasingly great cost. Quote, time after time, it was shot down by the hot fire of the infantry, end quote, a survivor would report. Quote, sometimes the staff being broken and sometimes a color bearer being shot, unquote. Private Marley, the 7th color bearer, was shot dead with the flagstaff in his hands, but the fallen standard was quickly raised again. Actually, that was probably the number 7 I was doing for the 24th Michigan. All right, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. I'm going to pick up a couple pages later, page 129. Let me see here. The 26th North Carolina had covered itself with glory. It was unquestionably encouraging praise for Burgoyne. He's not dead yet. He had just received this compliment that Burgoyne was getting a message from probably from Pettigrew, but I don't want to take the time to go back and find out. Had covered itself with glory. It was unquestionably encouraging praise for Burgoyne, who had seen his huge regiment mercilessly shredded in the few minutes it had taken to advance up the wooded ridge. Before Burgoyne barely had time to react to the compliment, however, another color bearer dropped, this 8, and the regimental battle flag again fell to the ground. It was the battlefield event Westwood McCreary had imagined and romanticized so long ago as a cadet at West Point. This is a Southerner. Before him lay a fallen flag and the opportunity to rally the troops in a moment of glory. He quickly retrieved the fallen standard, stepped in front of the battle line, and held the flag high above his head, waving it back and forth. He then turned to lead the advance and immediately took a bullet through his heart. Killed instantly, he fell on top of the flag, staining it with his blood. Nearby, 28-year-old Lieutenant George Wilcox of Company H saw McCreary go down. Wilcox scrambled forward, grabbed the bloodied flag, and pulled it from under McCreary's body, which was lying flat and motionless on the banner. Flag in hand, Wilcox tried to lead the advance. He managed to take only a few steps, however, when he was hit in the right side. He continued anyway, and seconds later was shot in the left foot. Unable to walk, he sank to the ground. As he tried to examine his wound, the battle line moved forward around him. This time, no one immediately tried to pick up the fallen flag. Ferocious fire sprayed the center of the line. The men pressed forward into the storm and then hesitated. Seeing a crisis arise at the center of his line, Colonel Burgoyne, 21 years old, strode up to Wilcox's fallen form and retrieved the down battle flag. His sword in his right hand and the flag in his left, Burgoyne hurried ahead of the battle line to cheer on the troops. Quote, "Dress on the colors," he ordered in his booming voice as he raised both flag and sword. Obediently, the surviving soldiers began closing ranks. Burgoyne then turned to Lieutenant Curtin and hurriedly asked if Company B could furnish a color bearer to take the regiment's colors forwards. Curtin called for Private Franklin L. Honeycutt. By the way, if we're keeping track, he'll be number 12. Who immediately stepped forward and put down his rifle to take up the deadly task. As Burgoyne prepared to hand over the colors, Lane appeared by his side. "We are in line on the right," he reported. Burgoyne passed the battle flag to Honeycutt with orders to advance and gave Lane General Pettigrew's message that the regiment has covered itself with glory today. Then the center of the line was struck by a blast of bullets and a blur of confusion. I don't want to bore you too much. Burgoyne's going to be hit at this point. He's going to end up dead. Mm-hmm. And a few pages later, I'm marking. Is this boring? Should I stop?
Keep going.
No, keep going.
Yeah. Okay.
So the 19th Indiana was also fighting the 26th North Carolina. They were just to the left of the 24th Michigan. Okay, and a Hoosier, of course, is an Indianan. He says, Gregg says in the book on page 132, one Hoosier officer after another had been struck down by the Confederate fire, which had also ravaged the 19th Indiana's color guard. So many color bearers had fallen that Lieutenant Colonel William Dudley had been forced to order Sergeant Major Blanchard to find recruits. While Blanchard was rounding up another color bearer, Dudley raised the colors himself. He was quickly shot down with a leg wound. Quote, "Colonel, you shouldn't have done this," end quote. Blanchard cried when he saw Dudley wounded and down. Quote, "That was my duty. I shall never forgive myself for letting you touch that flag," end quote. Blanchard then took the flag and, fearing it would be captured, tore the banner from its staff and wrapped it around his body under his sword belt. Within minutes, however, he too was hit. Quote, "Tell mother I never faltered," end quote, he said as he bled to death. For a torturous 20 minutes, maybe longer, Colonel Williams and his Hoosiers had been trading the deadliest fire with the rebels. How much longer could they sustain their fire and hold the line? And then the next page, they're talking about the 5th and the 6th soldiers of the 24th Michigan to go down carrying the flag. And let me just pick this up here.
Did you with the 26th North Carolina, you got up to 13?
And I'm about to read the 14th.
Oh, boy.
At the center of the line, the 91 men of Company F, this is the 26th North Carolina. I just skipped ahead a couple pages to page 134. At the center of the line, the 91 men of Company F, that's a big company.
Yeah.
Full-strength company is 100.
Yeah.
That's a big company. This is a fairly new regiment.
We're in the 26th.
26th right? North Carolina. Right. Company F. Remember we talked about Company F being near the flag.
Yeah.
So at the center of the line, the 91 men of Company F had been reduced to 3. Now, I'm not so sure I buy that necessarily. Because I think that was by the end of the whole battle.
Oh, okay.
But maybe not. Every officer was dead or wounded. Lieutenant John Holloway was dead. Captain Tuttle was down with a severe leg wound. Lieutenant Charles Sutterth was also wounded. Sergeants Henry Coffey and Robert Hudspeth were still alive and standing. So was 17-year-old Jimmy Moore, who was the only Company F private still unhurt when the Federals abandoned Herbst Woods. That's also Reynolds Woods. And what were you calling it before? Herbst Woods. That's right. That's what we said. Sometimes it's called McPherson's Woods, too. Mm-hmm. Moore had seen practically his entire company shot down around him. Now, as the black-hatted men in blue backed through the haze, this is the Iron Brigade, the Union soldiers, and out of the timber, out of those woods, they're heading east, they're retreating. The enemy fire became scattered and sporadic. Moore suddenly felt a sense of relief. Now he congratulated himself. He was finally safe. Then he was hit twice. Struck in the neck and the left thigh, he was knocked to the ground unconscious. Sergeant Coffey was hit too, leaving Sergeant Hudspeth as the only sole unhurt survivor of Company F, and that was 14 color bears. Nearby, Lieutenant Colonel, this is the 14th. Nearby, Lieutenant Colonel Lane, the 14th color bearer by some accounts, presented an irresistible target as he advanced at the center of the line holding the 26th battle flag. Less than 30 yards away at the edge of the woods, Corporal Charles H. McConnell and 7 other federal soldiers were the last troops of the 24th Michigan to fall back. Behind them, they could see the Confederate battle line moving toward them through the trees with their colors out in front. "Charlie," one of the black-headed soldiers called out, "can't you bring down that rebel color bearer?" McConnell had a single remaining round, and he promptly loaded it. "John, that's the man I'm laying for," he replied. "I'm shooting my last cartridge, and I'm going to bring him down if I know how to shoot." McConnell paused beside a sapling, steadied his rifle against the little tree. "That's right," the other soldier urged him on. "Take sure aim." McConnell carefully sighted down the barrel of his weapon at a tall, dark, bearded man in gray advancing toward him with the crimson Confederate battle flag. In McConnell's sight, the big man looked like a giant. At 30 yards, McConnell knew he could hardly miss. He squeezed the trigger.
30 yards.
14 color bearers, according to Greg, and some accounts he says, of the 26th North Carolina.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy.
I mean, it is
those
crazy.
Listeners, that's not typical, okay? That's kind of an extreme.
Right. It's amazing that people kept picking the damn thing up. If you see what happens to the guy before you, it's like, get me the hell away from this thing. I don't get it. Well, that's the 21st century person for you. No honor.
One of those regiments that was inflicting those casualties on those color bearers on day one in the Herbst Woods was the 151st Pennsylvania School Teachers Regiment, which should be near and dear to you, Bob.
Yeah.
They were held in reserve at the seminary, Schmucker Hall, and as the Union Army was falling back in the latter part of the first day, they were sent forward to cover everybody else's retreat. And a good friend of mine, a fellow I first started coming out of Gettysburg with in the early 1990s, wrote the regimental history on the 151st, and they ended up being the unit that had the second most casualties in the Union Army at Gettysburg. They lost about 337 out of 467 men. The author of the regimental history is a good friend of mine named Michael Drees. And the reason I bring that up is because Michael Drees has written 2 books on color bearers at Gettysburg.
Oh wow.
And now I think that's the title, Color Bearers at Gettysburg. He did 2 editions. He did one on Union and he did one on Confederate. Now, Mike's regimental history, he did a book on George McFarland, the colonel of the 151st. He also did one on the Schmucker Hall, the seminary, and his publisher was McFarland Publishing in Jefferson, North Carolina. But I think Mike's publisher for the paperbacks on the color bearers might have been Thomas Publications here in Gettysburg, if people are interested in that. But Mike did 2 books, one on each, the human interest stories on color bearers at Gettysburg, one Confederate, one Union.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So that's the thing is you can't learn too much. You can't read too much. There's so much out there about the Battle of Gettysburg and everything around the Battle of Gettysburg. And every time you think you have a question that doesn't have an answer, you find out somebody wrote a book about color bearers.
Right.
So, I mean, if you're interested in it, you could probably feel confident that there's someone else who has been interested in it before you and wrote something about it, even if it's just an article. We'll be right back. My favorite place to go, Mason-Dixon Distillery. They create their award-winning spirits from grain grown on Gettysburg National Military Park. And they cook their comfort food from ingredients sourced from local farms. For great food, amazing drinks, engaging conversation, and plenty of on-site parking, which is really hard to find here in Gettysburg, head over to Mason-Dixon Distillery, located at 331 East Water Street. Mention you heard this ad on Addressing Gettysburg and get half off any dessert with purchase of a meal. That's right, half off any dessert with the purchase of a meal just because you mentioned this show. That's Mason-Dixon Distillery, 331 East Water Street, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Think outside the bus and let Getty's Bike Tours show you the only way to truly experience Gettysburg. There's a reason why Getty's Bike Tours is the longest running bicycle tour company in Gettysburg, and that's because they put the customer's experience at the top of their list of priorities. Follow a licensed battlefield guide through some of the most legendary ground in American history. There's a tour route for everyone, from the newbie to the hardcore history buff. So go to gettysbike.com or call 717-752-7752 and book your reservation today. Mention Addressing Gettysburg and receive 10% off your tour. That's gettysbike.com or 717-752-7752. Discount does not apply to rentals.
Life lessons from American history. Here's one you can use today for personal growth. Gettysburg Lessons with one valuable lesson from Harrison Jeffords. Use symbols to motivate. For most Americans, the stars and stripes provide a sense of identity, a feeling of belonging, a motivating expression of that for which we stand, and a stirring reminder of the price our forefathers paid for the freedoms we enjoy. Our national flag goes beyond its intellectual meaning and reaches really into our hearts, and therein resides its power, its ability to harness our thoughts and feelings for noble ends. Like nearly everyone on both sides of the fight in this field that day, Jefferson had a profound emotional investment in his flag, which was an influential symbol that led him to give to his country what Abraham Lincoln called the last full measure of devotion.
Okay, I know spots like these are annoying, but they're a necessary evil when it comes to free content, so here we go. There are 3 ways to support this show and the Addressing Gettysburg project as a whole. 1, the most effective way, is becoming a monthly subscriber at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. That's patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. Our patrons receive access to interviews with experts recorded especially for them. Number 2, the fun way, by getting some merch over at our store at addressinggettysburg.com. Show that you are in the know by wearing one of our t-shirts, hoodies, or other items at addressinggettysburg.com. And number 3, the free way. You shop at Amazon like everyone else, so why not make those unnecessary sales that only make you feel guilty anyway count for something? Every time you want to go and shop on Amazon, go to addressinggettysburg.com first, then click that Amazon banner at the top of the homepage, then sign in and shop like you normally would. The beauty of this is that Amazon gives us credit for qualifying sales while it doesn't cost you 1 cent more than you intended to spend in the first place. But you gotta make sure that you do it every time you shop Amazon. Okay, there. We're finished with the obligatory pitch for your support. Man, our Patreon patrons must be laughing right now saying, we don't have to sit through commercials on Patreon. Wink. Hey everybody, we're back. All right, let's move on to Civil War _soldiers _history. And he wants to know, which do you think was the more impressive charge, Barksdale's or Pickett's? I, for one, would have loved to see Barksdale's wispy white locks flowing as he led his men. I tend to, I read a couple of things about Barksdale's charge, and I'm impressed by it more than Pickett's charge, and astounded by it that it's not as popular in the Gettysburg lore as Pickett's is. Because, I mean, he made it further. And that was one brigade. But you go ahead I got ahead of myself here. You guys go ahead. Tell us about Barksdale's charge versus Pickett's charge. When was it? What was it? Etc. Which would you find is more?
Well, as you
impressive?
said, Matt, Barksdale's charge was simply a brigade of Mississippians, and it was in conjunction with to their right, just south along Seminary Ridge, Kershaw's brigade and Sims' brigade of South Carolinians and Georgians. Barksdale's brigade attacked on the second day. It was part of Longstreet's assault on the southern end of the battlefield. Pickett's charge is the third day. And, of course, Pickett's charge is much bigger. You're talking Barksdale, a brigade, and Pickett's charge, essentially three parts of 3 different divisions. Yeah. And, of course, both were supported by artillery, but Pickett's was preceded by essentially what was the biggest artillery bombardment in this half of the world. So just based on scope and scale, to me, Pickett's charge is more impressive. And also, once Pickett's charge fails on the third day, Lee has essentially lost his offensive capabilities and assumes a defensive position for the remainder of the battle. But I think in some ways, Barksdale's charge may have been more dangerous to the Union because he was threatening Cemetery Ridge, and General Sickles, who had attacked along the Emmitsburg Road, Barksdale attacked, was in pretty bad condition when he retreated back to Cemetery Ridge. He lost about, I think, 4,200 of the 10,000 men he moved out to the Emmitsburg Road against orders on July 2nd. And when he got back to Cemetery Ridge, not only did he have the losses, but he was severely disorganized. And the Confederates were pursuing up onto Cemetery Ridge, Barksdale's guys. And, at the last minute, you get these guys from Culp's Hill who are leaving and rushing over to Cemetery Ridge to stabilize Sickles' line. So in some ways, I think Barksdale's charge might have had more chance of success.
It was more menacing.
More menacing. Yeah. It's a good way to put it.
Where just for reference for the listener, Barksdale's brigade, when they're coming up close to the Union line, where are they stopped?
Bob can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but they basically started the attack where the brigade marker is today, and that's just about where the
Mississippi Monument is.
Mississippi Memorial is, and there's actually a little button you can press on a thing there. It's one of the few audio things in the battlefield that still works today.
And there's a painting there showing Barksdale with his long gray hair, with his hat off in the charge.
Wait. Go back to this audio recording. I remember the one at the Point of Woods. But
does it still work, Jim?
Yeah. Last time I checked, it did.
It might be the last one that still does.
There used to be one at the Point of Woods for Pickett's charge. There's one up by the Peace Light Memorial about Buford. Neither one of those, to my knowledge, works. But the one behind the Mississippi Memorial, still working last time I checked.
Okay. So
I didn't even know.
So you know where the Mississippi Memorial is on West Confederate. You park your car, you walk that slate walkway to the Mississippi Monument and go past that Mississippi Monument, look at the Mississippi Monument, then turn around and there is a little stone area where they used to have a tape recording.
Yeah.
And there's a wayside exhibit showing the painting.
That's right. There's an interpretive marker there. That's right.
There's an interpretive marker there, and they talk about it, but there's also this little stone, maybe 3.5 feet high, little square, and there's a button in it. You press the button.
White button.
Never noticed the damn button.
This used to be typical for the park.
Right.
They used to have a lot of them, but most of them just don't work anymore.
Because that was state of the art.
This one still does.
Go check it.
Yeah. Maybe after we'll go get lunch and then we'll go out there and check it.
I want to go see this.
I've checked it pretty recently. It was working. So it's kind of fun.
Awesome.
But they went from there across the Spangler Fields up toward the Trossel Farm, across the Emmitsburg Road through what would have been the Wentz Farm, and then pursued the Confederates toward the Trossel Farm.
So they're at the Peach Orchard.
Yeah.
Right? They're
a little bit to the north, the Peach Orchard.
Well, a touch north from where the Wheatfield Road goes over.
Actually, the Peach Orchard at that time did go north of the Wheatfield Road.
Right.
Through the Wentz Farm. So, that would have technically been through part of the Peach Orchard, which unfortunately today on that side of the road, they don't have the peach trees. It's like a cornfield or something. But, and pursued the Confederates up toward where the New York Auxiliary Monument is today on Cemetery Ridge.
Pursued the Union.
Yes, thank you. Pursued the Union.
So they didn't. Did they get that far though? They didn't get that far, did they?
Not as far as the New York Auxiliary Monument.
No, they got about halfway up that ridge though, from direction. The swale, where the Trossel family is, up to the top of that ridge. You got about halfway up.
Right. Okay.
Bloody Run or Plum Run, which runs through the Valley of Death. Its headwaters are north of the Trossel Farm. Mm-hmm. So if you're on the Union lines by the New York Auxiliary Monument, you look west and you can see where there's kind of like rough area, and since they can't cut down things very well there's bushes and there's a few big trees. It's in that area.
There's a battery marker out there, a couple of cannons. I think was it Walcott's battery?
But even north of that is a marker that the 126th, I think it was, or 125th. Yeah, Willard was hit. Now, I don't think Barksdale made it that far. Okay, that's where Willard was hit. But just a little bit west of that was where they captured General Barksdale, the commander of the
and Willard's brigade was sent out to stop him, right?
Right. They were the Harper's Ferry Cowards, as they were known. They were up there north
by the Bryan Farm.
By the Bryan Farm on Cemetery Ridge. Yeah. Their monuments are there from where they repulsed Pettigrew's division on July 3rd.
Right.
But they were brought down and thrown in to stop this advance of Barksdale, which they do.
Right.
Which they do. And Barksdale is mortally wounded, and he's going to be...
Willard gets his head blown off.
Yeah, and it's a messy affair.
Yeah.
So, Jim, which one are you going to want to see?
I think Pickett's charge is more impressive simply because of the numbers that are involved and the bombardment that preceded it.
Yeah.
Just the scale.
Yeah.
Based on the scale. And it was Lee's last desperate effort.
Yeah.
Whereas to some extent, Barksdale's charge is more of a smaller scale, smaller unit.
I'm going to answer that by, I always used to say on tours, if there's one place, if I could go back in time, if there's one place I want to be at one point in this battle, I want to be right here at the angle, looking west, when Pickett's division and Pettigrew's division come out of those trees, because apparently it elicited comments from all sorts of veterans about the awe, the majesty of the event.
Yes.
And the precision that it would take to line up actually parts of 4 different divisions, although in the front line would have been just parts of 2 right away. But that must have been pretty cool to see. So I tell people I want to be right here watching them come out of the trees for just a couple of minutes. Because if I stay here, I'm going to be dead.
Right.
It must have been incredibly majestic, and I think the movie did a great job, of portraying that with those aerial views from drones or whatever they used of the men going across the fields. But I always think of a quote that used to be on an old interpretive marker on Little Round Top, and I think they still have it, the interpretive marker at the Farnsworth House in the Tavern on Baltimore Street. And it's a quote from Benjamin Rittenhouse, 5th United States Artillery. He took command of the artillery on Little Round Top after Charles Hazlitt went down. And he watched Pickett's charge, and he said, I felt proud of that charging column of rebels. Even though they were rebels, they were citizen soldiers, American volunteers. And this is a Union guy who's watching watching Pickett's charge from Little Round Top, and can't help but admire. And, there were Union guys who wrote accounts of how much they admired the bravery of the Confederates in the early part of the attack. And, of course, by the time they got to the Emmitsburg Road and became more of a threat, sometimes they started looking more as more of a threat or almost disrespectful. How dare they charge in front of, how dare they dress their lines in front of us like this? Right. But, yeah, Bob, you're right. It must have been awfully majestic and something you would never forget. And I certainly would love to have been able to see it, too. Yeah. In 2013, the park allowed people to reenact Pickett's charge the very hour.
I remember. I was a Little Round Top where Rittenhouse would have seen it. Is that where you were? Yeah, I was giving a tour at Little Round Top. This was the 150th anniversary when the advance came across the field.
We knew about it ahead of time, and you could pick any one of the 9 Confederate brigades that you wanted to walk in the footsteps of. And I debated for days and weeks beforehand. I thought, well, do I want to see it from Cemetery Ridge, or do I want to participate in it? Yeah. And I chose to participate in it. I kind of wish I hadn't in some ways, because all I remember is all I saw. And this was kind of revealing for me to understand what it was like to go through Pickett's charge. All I remember is the back of the guy in front of me and looking down at the ground, because the ground is very uneven, and I didn't want to twist an ankle. Right. So I'm looking at where I'm stepping in, and I look up, and there's a guy in front of me, just his back. So you don't really see so much when you're in the middle of it. Right. But there were an awful lot of people who stood on Cemetery Ridge and watched all those people come at him, and I thought, wow, that must have been something. I hope I get a chance to do that.
I wish they would do that every year, so that one year I could be in it, and the next year I could watch it, and then I'd have.
But the 150th drew the crowds. It would be pretty anticlimactic any other year.
Crowds this year too.
Let me come back. I still want to answer the question for myself, because that was just the first part. But Jim, which of the 9 brigades that you could have opted for did you opt for?
I chose Kemper's Brigade on the far right.
All right, very
because I was born in Lynchburg, Virginia.
There you go.
And the 11th Regiment, part of Kemper's Brigade, was in that brigade.
They were right in the middle, I think, in the Kemper's Brigade.
Yeah, but they're on the far right. They're the guys that come up through the Spangler Farm, up to the Emmitsburg Road, and then make the hard left-hand turn and go down toward the Cadore Barn. Right. So I kind of wanted to see it from their perspective.
Cool. But by my quick thinking here, there were 4 brigades, although they were small ones because of the first day's casualties, in Pettigrew's division. There were 3 brigades in Pickett's division. Okay, there was Garnett, Kemper, and then kind of behind them, Armistead. There were Wilcox's and Perry's or Lang's, the Floridians. So already we're to 11. And then we've got the 2 of Trimble's division that followed Pettigrew. So do you remember which of the 2 that you weren't allowed to be in? Maybe it was the trailing group of Trimble's, because that wouldn't have been so cool.
That's what it was. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we didn't have anybody to our right portraying Wilcox or the Floridians or anything that came up later. We were the extreme right, and we formed near the. They didn't take us through the woods because it was kind of wet near the horse trail there along West Confederate Avenue. So we actually started on the slope. If you're familiar with Pickett's charge and Pickett's division, there's woods to the South Virginia Memorial, and then as you come out of the trees, there's a hillside but kind of between the Virginia Memorial and the Spangler Farm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of started up on the hillside and then kind of marched up to the Emmitsburg Road. And then before we got there, we kind of angled.
So you were kind of heading west first, and then you angled.
Yeah, they explained it to us at the time that because of the fences and so forth that are there today, that for practical reasons, they weren't going to take the fences down for us. Right. So we had to kind of alter the route a little bit. But we did come up, we crossed the Emmitsburg Road, and I remember we went to the south side of the Cadore Barn where most people were going. On the other side.
So you personally were not just in Kemper's brigade, which was the rightmost brigade represented that day, but also were you at the very end of the line?
Yeah,
because you would have been. If I would have known that, I could have waved to you from Little Round Top. So, hey, Jim, I would have realized that was you.
We came up as I remember somewhere between the copse of trees and the Pennsylvania Memorial, somewhere in that area, because we came up from the, as I said, south of the Cadore Barn.
Yeah.
But what I remember about that, and we're kind of getting on a tangent, I apologize, but I'll never forget it. All the people that were standing at the wall representing the Union side, and when everybody came together, everybody was shaking hands.
Did they have flags up there, by the way? Could you?
I think so.
Okay.
Each of the brigades was led by a ranger, and I know sometimes when the Rangers lead walks on any given day, they carry flags. I don't remember. I don't think we did actually, Bob. I don't think we had flags, but I remember something, and I'm just going to add this. It doesn't really have anything to do with it. But after everybody met at the wall, they did something called echo taps. So everybody kind of shook hands and stopped, and then things kind of calmed down. And they had this bugler up by the Bryan farm on the far end, and he starts playing taps. He fades out, and there's a guy maybe several hundred yards down the line who picks up the taps, plays his part, and they did this all the way from the Bryan farm to the Pennsylvania Memorial. Yeah. You could just hear taps going down the ridge.
It's eerie.
It really was.
Have you ever been out there on Memorial Day when they start 100 Nights of Taps? They do the same thing around the whole battlefield.
Oh, I don't think I've done that.
Oh, yeah, I was there
this summer. They were doing it.
Yeah, it was so cool. It was awesome, and they do it for 100 nights. But I don't think they do. The first night is the big one where they have tons of buglers or trumpetists, whatever, all over the place.
Okay, well now in the National Cemetery. Each night between Memorial Day and Labor Day. They just started this 2 years ago.
Yeah.
We have licensed battlefield guides that do free walking tours the cemetery about 6 o'clock when the visitor center closes. When that ends around 7 o'clock every night, a bugler, a volunteer comes in and plays taps.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if this is related to what you're talking about.
Probably.
And they just started this summer before last. So that'd be summer of 2018.
This is exactly what he's talking about.
And it was a huge success.
Yeah.
And they continued it this year. And so a guy comes in and plays taps every night in the cemetery. Right after the guy gets done, so he does it around 7 o'clock, and there's
something about that first night because I was at the Louisiana Monument when it started, just accidentally. I didn't even know, and this guy comes out with a trumpet, and I'm like, "The hell are you doing?" I thought he was going to play Louisiana jazz or something, New Orleans jazz, and he goes, "Oh, we're about to do the 100 Nights of Taps," and I hadn't heard of it or anything, and so he starts playing, and then when he's done, I hear somebody further. I couldn't see where they were, but it sounded like they were over in the peach orchard. I didn't know where they're very faintly, but it's eerie. It sends a chill up your spine, and it reminds you of why exactly you're standing in that place, and that it's not a place to go rollerblading. It's
right.
It's a very serious place to be, and it reminds you of the gravity of the whole thing.
So let me get back to answer the last part of the question for me. I've often said I want to be right there at the angle, but if I could be a drone or in a little drone, I think Barksdale Charge would be cooler to see Barksdale's Charge.
Yeah.
But they've only got about a quarter of a mile to cover open ground that they're under fire from Union artillery and stuff. Whereas Pickett had almost 7/8 of a mile across that field.
Yeah.
But if you could follow the front of Barksdale's Charge in a drone and sometimes turn around, it'd be colorful. The 114th Pennsylvania, they're just by the Sherfy farm. Those are the people who own the peach orchard.
Uniforms.
Yes, see how colorful that would be, right? And you could kind of turn and you can see the Union line, and then turn and look at Barksdale on his horse with his long gray hair. Who was it? One of the lectures this week talked about, it was Matt Atkins, the comb over.
Yeah.
Because he was balding. But anyway, and then watch them crush the line and how they had to do a rather tough maneuver to do under fire.
Yeah.
They would then oblique to their left, at least 3 of the regiments did, and follow the axis of the Emmitsburg Road for a while as they're rolling up the flank of the north wing of Sickles's V-shaped line. And then, because you'd see Union soldiers refusing their flank. They had been facing west, and now the threat's coming from the south, so they're refusing their flank. And then you'd see them break through that and then do another kind of oblique back to the right as they're heading back towards where the Pennsylvania Monument area is today. That would have been cool to see all those fancy maneuvers.
I find it interesting. I think both of your answers are very interesting because it just occurred to me listening to them that the word impressive can mean more than one thing, because you guys are talking about from a visual, like witnessing this thing occur, impressive, but I took it to mean results wise. And so to me, Barksdale's charge is the more impressive charge. It's a brigade, and it's doing so much damage as he's just going through. And like you're saying, the visual of it, but if we're going visually though, it's absolutely Pickett's charge to me. Although, I mean, there's got to be something to a brigade just kind of like just plowing through everything and causing all this havoc, and I don't know, but I think it would be Pickett's as far as
there's no one spot of the battlefield you could stand to look at all of Barksdale's.
No, you have to
could
be
stand on.
I'll tell you where I'd like to be.
Where's that?
The Sherfy House.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine you're in the Sherfy House?
Yeah, I'm glad you said the house instead of the barn.
I want to survive this thing. Tell people what I've seen.
By the way, folks, the Sherfy House, most people don't ever go to. Maybe I shouldn't be saying this.
Don't tell them. It's a special surprise.
Okay, never mind.
It might be. I don't know. I haven't talked to Lewis, but it might be part of our Get Out of the Car tour.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Never mind, folks.
It should be.
Oh, it's a shame. I was looking forward to you talking about it.
You already know. We'll tell you.
I've been in the house.
Okay. Oh, really? I haven't been
One
in.
time. I had a tour. I had to meet somebody who was staying there, and I got to...
Oh, you get to go in?
Yeah. Is that what you were getting at?
No.
I was just getting to the battle scars on the side,
on the
especially
exterior?
the south side. Yeah.
What I was getting at is the bullet holes inside the house, which I didn't know about. And the people that I was meeting took me upstairs and showed me like inside doorways. And I flipped out. But it was amazing when you're in the Sherfy House and you look in all directions out the windows. And you look in one direction, you're seeing Cemetery Ridge and the Peach Orchard.
Yeah, what a great
view. And then you're looking over at the Confederate line only 500 yards away. And, it's wintertime, like this time of year that I was in there, and I just went, holy smokes, the view from this house it's right in the middle of everything.
Oh, we got to do a podcast from the Sherfy House.
Oh, my gosh.
Wouldn't that be cool? From the upstairs of the Sherfy House.
Oh.
And they keep the refrigerator really well stocked with beer for the guests. They do. I've seen it.
Come on now, the foundation owns that. Wow. Doesn't the foundation
they take care of the people that stay there, I tell you, man.
I'm going to talk to somebody at the foundation and see if we could do that, because that would be awesome.
Yeah, it would be.
Well, and you're right, because we went out there one time. We were going for that bike ride, and we went out, and I had never gone out there before because I always thought somebody lived there. And Jim, what you're saying, like you're in the middle of it all, and when you look at the bullet holes on the outside of the house, and then you just kind of look around you look where the Confederate line is and everything, and you're going, man, this is like right in the middle of it.
The eye of the storm is what it is, right? Oh
my God, it is really cool to be there and just imagine the whole thing going on around you. And I love this idea of doing one from out there. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to get it done.
That'd be great.
Okay, let's move on here. People have asked about everyone's favorite monuments and markers, but which are your least favorite? And I don't have a person, this still might be Civil War soldiers, I'm not sure. Least favorite monument. Do you have a least favorite? I've never heard of anybody say, God, I hate that monument.
Well, when I got this question, Matt, that you had provided before we showed up here today, I thought, oh, geez. I love all the monuments. It's one of the great things about the battlefield is it's the best marked battlefield in the world, and they all tell a story. And then I'm doing a tour the other day.
Oh, okay.
And I found it. I won't really say it's my least. Yeah, well, it does kind of qualify, but let me explain.
Okay.
It's the 42nd New York. It's the Tammany Regiment.
We were just talking about this.
This was my answer to the question. No, you didn't steal it. You just beat me to it. I thought about it too. And really? I thought, no, it's got to be something that's notable enough, because there's so many monuments that aren't as notable, like the 2nd Massachusetts, but that was the first regimental monument placed here, so let's not be too hard on those guys. So there's some that are, just not that notable.
Right.
And if they're that way, they're not going to jump to your mind.
59th, we talked about that. Right. I mean, they were right in a key place, but their monument is particularly impressive.
But this is one that everyone knows. It's notable because it's so different, and I'm sure we're going to have the same idea of why it's not our favorite. So go ahead and tell us.
Well, okay, let's talk about it. The 42nd New York, if you're familiar with Gettysburg, is the monument near the copse of trees that has the Native American in front of the tent. And that's why I'd call it my least favorite. I like it, but you have to understand that the monuments were actually placed here by the actual guys who fought here, the actual veterans themselves about 25 years after the battle. And they're using the monuments to tell you their story of what they did here. Well, the 42nd New York was guys from Manhattan. And during the Civil War, some things weren't a whole lot different from what they are today. The Republicans always accused the Democrats of not supporting the war effort, and that's the way it was during the Civil War. And to refute Republican claims that they were not supporting the war effort, Tammany Hall, the Democratic Party machine in New York City, raised the regiment. They sponsored a unit. They paid money to have them recruited, armed, fed, equipped, the whole deal. And that regiment was the 42nd New York. So when you drive up Hancock Avenue to the north toward the high water mark and the angle, you see on your right this very prominent teepee on the top of a monument with a Native American on the top. Right. People are always asking us, and if you don't mention it to them, they'll ask you at the end of the tour, hey, there was this monument with this Indian on it. Were there any Native Americans in the battle? Indians? No. And the reason I say least favorite is because then you've got to go and explain to people what's going on, and it takes time. And of course, you're getting to the climax of the battle at the high water mark.
That's so frustrating. Can I interrupt just for a minute? I want to hear the rest of your story. Yeah. One of the advantages of being a bicycle guide, Jim, we're going to try to get you to do more and more and more of those. So you got to anticipate what the people are going to be seeing from our last stop, where we were stopped and talking, to our next stop. Okay, so we were coming from the Pennsylvania Monument. The next time we're going to stop will be at the high water mark. And so what am I telling people to look for? Where Hancock was wounded. If they're from Vermont, I'll say look for this, John Gibbon. Okay, but I'll say, now I'm going to answer a question you're going to ask now. The answer is no. And they look at me like, huh? I said, at our next stop, you ask yourself, what was the question Bob was saying? And the answer is no. And most of the time it doesn't work. People say, what was that question? Some people say, I get it. There were no Native Americans here.
Right, exactly. The reason that there is a Native American is that Tammany Hall is named after the Tammany Indians. This is Chief Tammany. So the men are using their monument to tell you their story generations later. And I remember when I first became a guide, Bob, we would be driving up Hancock Avenue, and they would always say, point to your left, to the west toward the Virginia Memorial. Because otherwise they're going to see on the right the 42nd New York, and they're going to stop and ask you about it in the middle of your narrative.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what they think.
Now, if you have 8th graders, you tell them there's a monument up there. It's the only one that has a belly button on the battlefield.
Now, I heard that the veterans, when they were debating on what their monument was going to be, a lot of them didn't want to put that up for fear that people would think that Indians had fought here.
And that's what battlefield guides are for.
Yeah. But am I right in that, or did I... is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly? Was that a concern?
I never heard that before.
You never heard that? Yeah, see, I got to find out where I heard that. I think it was in one of those monument books. I got to go and look through. But whatever.
By the way, the Indians were Delaware-speaking, I believe, Indians, and they were not living in teepees. So they said in the 1680s when Tamanent was alive, who's the man portrayed there. He's the guy that William Penn bought land from. And so it's also historically inaccurate from a Native American perspective. Yeah. Now, by the 1880s, when the monuments are going up, the Delaware, like a lot of the Native Americans, Eastern Indians, had been shoved out to the Great Plains, and then they were living in teepees.
Right.
But it's historically inaccurate from a number of reasons.
My cousin married a guy who speaks Delaware. That's interesting. Like, boat, go.
There's got to be a joke coming from this.
That's the joke. Boat.
Oh.
Like they talk. Never mind. It's a Delaware accent. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. Civil_war_nerd wonders, is there anything guides want to say to people but can't? Why Civil War Nerd thinks that you would say it here where anybody can listen to it, I don't know, but probably better to say it here than right to the face of somebody who first. Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Civil War Nerd. What I want to tell you publicly is Matt stole your shirt.
What?
Saturday at the
Getty's
lecture,
Nerd. No.
He had a shirt that said Getty's Nerd.
Yes.
It's about Matt Atkinson?
No, Matt Calorie, our host here, stole your shirt.
Well, first of all, he's Civil War Nerd. I'm Getty's Nerd, and I do believe he started his account after I had the shirt made. But thank you anyway, Bob, for trying to get me in trouble.
I like your shirt, man.
Thank you. But yeah, so anything you want to say to guys but can't? Or
not to guys,
to people. Well, guides too.
There's a lot of things I'd like to say to people on other cars during tours. I can't. You got to remain professional. You know what I'm talking about, Bob. Oh my gosh, there's a bike guide. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Because there's idiots out there who will tell you you're going the wrong way on a one-way road. And they don't realize that bicycles can do that. Yeah. So I better not go there, right, Bob?
No, you know some of the history there.
Go there.
There are times where you'd like to say things to people, but because you're with a group and you're in their car, you remain professional.
Right.
I had a tour just the other day that happened. And it was, you get people who have their own opinions about stuff, and sometimes it's just better to let them express their own opinions, even if they might be really off kilter, not based on facts.
Right.
Whatever. I mean, it's their tours. Sometimes they like to express their opinions, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But I had a lady the other day, we were out on the first day's field, and we saw the McPherson barn, and she said, "Oh, yeah, this is in the cyclorama painting." And I thought, no, cyclorama's day 3, and this is day 1, and I don't think it's visible from there. And she said it again. And she said it very definitively. Yes, this is in the cyclorama. And I wanted to say, ma'am, I don't think it was, I think it might have been the Kadori barn that you were seeing. But sometimes it's not a good idea. Just let people think that. You know what I mean? It's just easier just to let it go.
And the McPherson barn isn't like way in the background in the...
I was trying to think, is it visible in cyclorama?
So now we got to go there after lunch.
But I don't think so. I do not think the McPherson barn is anywhere in the cyclorama.
But if it is, it's not prominent enough that somebody's going to remember that over the Kadori barn.
It had to be the Kadori barn, but you just, sometimes you just don't want to correct people. It's let them think what they want.
My whole thing is, and I'm not a guide, so I hear different questions, but I'm sure you guys hear these as well. But sitting down at the Getty's bike shed, I get a lot of the same questions from people all the time. Where is the visitor center? Now, for anybody who doesn't know, the Getty's bike location is at the visitor center, but we're just over in the bus parking lot. So people come up. The trick of the whole visitor center is it's probably defying some kind of science, because it's enormous, right? This behemoth of a building is just so big. You can see it from a lot of places, except for the parking lot where you park to go to this building. And so what ends up happening, and I don't understand like psychologically what's going on with the tourists when they do this, but what they end up doing is walking towards our parking lot, which from the parking lot number 1, which is where you want to go to the visitor center if you can. From there, looking in the direction of the bus lot, there's nothing visual that is inviting, that says, come this way. This is where you want to go.
Right.
In fact, it's the opposite direction. There's a flagpole and there's a sidewalk and there's probably a bunch of people walking towards them. But for some reason, there's always this handful of people that just slip through the cracks and come all the way over to our lot. But they come in the south entrance of the lot, and we're up by the north entrance of the lot. So I get to watch them walk from the south entrance all the way to the north. It's sometimes a whole family of 5 or 6 people, led by their intrepid dad, and all of them just confused out of their minds. But they see our sheds that we use for the bikes, and then behind us is the bus depot, which is there's a couple of offices and a couple of bathrooms in there. And they see that and they go, oh, we found the visitor center. And so they come up to us sometimes and they'll say, yeah, we got 5 tickets for a bus tour. And I go, oh, okay, you got to go to the, and I know they think, and I just want to mess with them. I go, yeah, you need to go to the visitor center for that. And they're like, I thought you were the visitor center. And this whole thing. So where's the visitor center is one of them. Where does the battlefield begin is another. All of these things you really can't blame them for because they're new to the whole thing. They don't understand how immense this whole place is. But when you hear it 50, 60 times in a week, you kind of want to just, yell at them and stuff. So how do you keep your cool as guides? I mean, obviously you have to remind yourself they don't know, and also I'm getting paid. So, but still, it's got to some questions have to make you just go,
that's true. For me, the one thing that I would like to say but will never say, a handful of guides have, and that is we can take tips. I don't want that to be out there. I don't want people to know because, frankly, I'm not doing it for tips.
Wait.
Okay.
I'm missing what you're saying. So you're saying you don't want to say that.
Oh, and I never will. I never have. Although... Well, okay, on a tour. Unless you're going to tip me.
I know. Yeah. It's in the mail. So you're saying on a tour? Oh, that's not classy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Some
do you
guides,
do that? You don't do that, Jim, do you?
Oh, don't solicit tips.
Right.
Never say anything about it at all. But I just had the other day. It just happened on a tour, and the guy at the end of the tour, and it happens all the time. Are you allowed to take a tip?
Oh,
and I just tell them the truth.
Yeah.
We're not employees of the park, and we're allowed to, but that's at your discretion, and we appreciate whatever you want to give us. No, I think it's completely unethical to say, hey, I can take tips, or I did a pretty good job. So if you want to come to me, I would never do that.
Have you heard guys do that?
I have. I've
heard of guys doing that. I've never actually heard it
on a bus situation where the guide said, I don't think this guide is currently with us anymore. This is my only job. I don't have another job like some guides do. And I would appreciate any.
That's my case. I would never say that.
I mean, that's why I said I would never say that.
We have visitor center buses out of the Gettysburg Tour Center that come down to a mile away to the visitor center and do tours out of there. And the driver quite often will tell people, before we even get on the bus, we'll explain to the group as he's introducing himself, these guys are not employees of the park, they're independent contractors, and you may give them gratuities. It's up to you. I've heard of stories of guides standing outside the door with, their hat upside down. It's like, I won't do that. I always get off and stand away from the bus, distant from me. So if they want to get off that bus and turn away from me, that's fine. If they want to, they'll see you and they'll come over to you, and most of them do.
Right. Well, yeah, because that way you're not just standing there at the bottom of the steps when they're getting off the bus, and it's just awkward because then it's almost like you're waiting,
Jim. Because I will usually stand near where they're getting off because they'll often want to shake your hand and say one thing or another.
Well, they'll have a question maybe for you.
Yeah, but I will tell people before I get off the bus, and this is only visitor center buses. I will say I'll be right outside the bus if you want to talk and ask any more questions.
Yeah.
So, but actually, and this is, I hope, apocryphal, but there is a story I've heard of a guide who would give $1 to the person sitting in the first seat and say, when you get off the bus, give me this $1 back.
Oh, that's unethical. And what they're seating,
priming the pump.
Yeah, because then everybody else will see that and they'll think to give a tip.
Yeah.
And you'll find that if the first person off the bus gives you a tip for whatever reason, apart from that other people will, and you'll do a lot better.
That makes sense. That's it makes sense that people would follow that because it's a psychological thing.
The thing I like about tips is more of this is a way I know they like the tour.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes I know I have given a just absolutely wonderful tour. The people say wonderful things about it, but they don't give a tip. Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit of, oh man, what was wrong with that? But then I realized, they're from a particular part of the country where they just don't even think about giving tips or whatever.
Or they assume you're a park ranger and it's your regular job. They don't know.
Right.
Yeah, people get that confused a lot.
My reason for saying that is a kind word of what the tour meant to you goes further than the money.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Now, that's true for me. When Matt gets to be a guide, the poor guy has been poor his entire life.
Me.
Please,
no, I haven't. I was rich for a while, but I squandered it all.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Darth Etzgorn apparently is heading towards buying me a keg of beer. He asks, in episode 5 of Ask a Guide, there was a question about the U.S. regulars. My question is, were there Confederate brigades made up of former regulars? I know most of the command staff were regular Army before the war. What about the common infantrymen? I asked him to clarify this question when he sent it in because it didn't make sense to me. And so what he's really asking is, was there a CS regulars? Were there regular units in the Confederate States service?
It's a tough question. Maybe not that tough. The Confederacy, was established right at the beginning of the war. There was no established government. There's no established military. So there really is no regulars. There was something called provisional troops. The Confederates had provisionals. And I think there was a Tennessee unit that was provisional, and I guess they were considered to be, part of the Confederate Army as before they were part of a state. And that was very, very limited. But I guess we ought to define U.S. what regulars are, because we have a monument on the battlefield to the U.S. regulars. And what these guys are is, most of the guys who fight in the Civil War on both sides are volunteers. And the U.S. regulars were guys who were in the Army as a career. They were professional soldiers. They're not volunteering just for the war. And in the entire U.S. Army, at the beginning of the Civil War, through the whole country, I think we had 16,000. That's it. So they're very limited number.
And those are spread out all over the country.
Right. And they represent the U.S., not an individual state.
Right.
So down in front of Little Round Top, across Crawford Avenue, in front of the Rose Woods, we have a series along a road of individual U.S. regular units. And then there's the big, what looks like the Washington Monument near the high water mark, the copse of trees. This big elliptical monument, that's to all the U.S. regulars as a whole. It's called the U.S. Regular Monument.
And that's put up by Congress?
Yeah, I think it's put up by the U.S. government. But to my knowledge, there were, most of these Confederates were volunteers from various states. And you see that in the uniforms they're wearing. All the uniforms are different because the state governments are providing the uniforms per state. I mean, that's the difference. You got the Union, and you got the Confederates who are a confederation of states. That's one of the issues that's going on here.
Yeah.
There was something called the Provisional Army. Maybe Bob knows more about it, can explain about it than I do. But I've heard the provisionals, and they were the closest thing I think that the Confederates had. But because they didn't have an established military to begin with, you really don't have regulars. We talked about Henry King Burgoyne Jr., 21 years old, 26, North Carolina. He's a colonel at Gettysburg. You ask yourself, how is this guy, 21 years old, a colonel of a regiment that's about twice the size of a typical regiment? Many of the guys twice his age, maybe in their 40s. And it's because the Confederacy didn't have an established government. They needed guys, when volunteers came into Richmond by train, that had military experience to train them. Where are you going to find those guys that have military experience? Military academies. Henry King Burgoyne Jr. was a cadet at the Virginia Military Institute. He's probably about 19 years old. You got to give him rank so they can train these guys. So he's probably a captain, right? He's sent to Richmond. You know that in wartime, you can move up a lot faster in rank. 2 years later at Gettysburg, he's a colonel, 21-year-old colonel, and that's how.
Attrition. Yeah. Okay, so kind of, but not really, is the short answer.
Yeah, and they were very limited. Like I said, I heard of some unit, I think came out of Tennessee or something like that. It was known as the first provisional Confederates, that they really weren't representing a state, but the government.
Simple answer for Gettysburg, I think, is no.
No, forget it. You're right. But did the Confederate government try throughout the course of the war to develop a regular army? I mean, because it all kind of came together really quick, between Lincoln being elected and the war starting. Everything kind of, so obviously they weren't going to have pre-existing regulars like the U.S. did. But as they were going along, they're like, well, we got to build a government. So do we need regular units, or did they not? Do we know if they,
let me just interject, not with the voice of authority here, but the Confederates especially concerned about states' rights. So there's more of a sense of not giving too much authority to the central government.
So even when they're trying to band together to win a war, they're still all about states' rights within themselves.
I'm talking about the Army.
Yeah.
I'm thinking in the Navy, it was different. Because it was the Confederate States Navy, at least the CSN is on their ships. And I think that might have been a central government.
Well, that makes sense because it's protecting, theoretically, the whole...
But I'm no expert or even anywhere close to being an expert on naval affairs. There might be someone in your audience who is that could tell us about that.
And I'm not aware of any provisional or Confederate regulars at Gettysburg.
Right.
I mean, it's all brigades, and almost every brigade at Gettysburg is uniform. All the regiments are from a single state. That's the general rule. The Union side, it was usually mixed. It's rare to find an entire, like the New Jersey Brigade, all New Jersey units. You find they tend to be mixed more. But
but there's a couple of mixed ones in the Confederate Army, aren't there?
Yeah, there's some. Iverson's Brigade.
But generally, you're going to find more.
Division has divided up.
You're going to find more from the same.
But on a general basis.
Was Pettigrew's mixed?
I think
Pettigrew was because he had Mississippians.
And
North Carolinians. No, that was Archer's Brigade.
Oh, Archer
had Alabama and Tennessee.
I'm thinking of the Woods.
The 11th Mississippi, though, was part of Pettigrew's.
There you go. Okay.
Or Davis. I'm sorry, that was Davis, though.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought Pettigrew was
Davis was the one I was thinking of. When I said Iverson, there was the 55th North Carolina and 3 Mississippi regiments in Davis's brigade.
Davis's was mixed, but Pettigrew was uniform.
Oh, Pettigrew was North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Yeah, there's got to be some others. I can't think of them off the top of my head.
That are mixed?
The Robertson's Brigade had 1 Arkansas regiment with the 1st, 4th, and 5th Texas.
That's right.
Otherwise, let's see. Wolford was all Georgia. Semmes was all Georgia. Kershaw was all South Carolina.
Pickett's divisions, all
Barksdale's all Mississippi. Yeah, Pickett's all Virginia. Wright is all Georgia. Mahone is all Virginia. Hey, I can't think of others. Was Posey all Mississippi? I think he was.
Were there any Floridians with Posey?
I don't think so, because they only had 3 regiments here, and they were all in Perry or Lang's brigade. Oh, you know what? Some of the Maryland units.
Posey was
over Culp's Hill.
Culp's Hill.
Yeah, Maryland, North Carolina, and Virginia mixed.
Yeah, Maryland Stewart had North Carolinians, Virginians. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Posey, you have Mississippi.
All Mississippi? Okay.
12th, 16th, 19th, 48.
Stewart's brigade in Johnson's division of Ewell's Second Corps, and besides Davis's brigade.
Well, here you got. Wait. Okay, you said Archer, right?
Archer. That's right. Tennessee and Alabama.
And Alabama. That's what I was thinking of. The 7th Tennessee when I asked that, and then Davis, North Carolina, Mississippi, and then looks like everybody else is all the same in that little unit there. And then you got. Well, in the cavalry.
Cavalry would be different.
Yeah, you got Wade Hampton's brigade. He's got North Carolina and Georgia.
And in the artillery battalions, they would have mixed up some.
Yeah, I'm not even looking at those. But yeah, and then and I think what he's kind of also alluding to in this question is when the war breaks out and men resign from the Army, regulars resign from the Army and then go, like Lee, for example, right? He goes south. And so I think what he's also trying to ask is, do we know of any units that were made up entirely of former regulars, U.S. regulars? My guess to that would be that they wouldn't do that. They would spread them out to train the new army. They would get the experience of these guys being U.S. regulars and spread them out as much as they can so that they could train.
Yeah, that would be my guess too.
I'm not sure what you're...
I don't know what I'm saying either.
Basically, I think the answer is no.
Okay. All right. Also, he has a what if, and we all know how we feel about these, but Darth Etzkorn buys me a beer every time I say his name right. If Lee won at Gettysburg and the peace offer was given, would the Confederacy occupy Pennsylvania, or would they give it up, or would they give up what was gained at such a high cost? I'm not a giant fan of What If, but this one has perplexed me. So what if they had won? What was the play? Because Lee did have kind of a plan, didn't he? Of we're going to go up there, we're going to beat them on their own soil, and then.
Well, he's saying if Lee won at Gettysburg and the peace offer was given, to end the war,
right?
At that point, the Confederates have no reason to stay in Pennsylvania. I mean, when the war started, their aim was not to invade and seize northern territory. They just wanted to simply establish their own government, be left alone. Mm-hmm. And coming to Pennsylvania is somewhat of a desperate thing to do in the middle of the war in order to keep the war going and potentially win over the people of the North and put pressure on ending the war. That's what Lee's doing. He knows he really can't win by defeating the Union Army in the field. He's hoping that he can just fight long enough and inflict enough casualties that people in the North don't want to fight anymore. Mm-hmm. So I don't see any reason that they would have stayed up there, stayed in this direction, if the war had ended. Now, if the war doesn't end and Lee wins the Battle of Gettysburg, it's a different story. I know Lee hoped to stay up here at least until the following fall, because one of the reasons he's come up here is to relieve Virginia farmers of the presence of the two armies. And Virginia is basically an agricultural wasteland. So he's supplying his army on a part of the country hasn't been touched by the war, and he's sending cattle and supplies to the South. And if he has to return in the fall of '63, by then, with the absence of the two armies that summer, there should be a crop waiting for him to feed his army, plus the supplies that he's accumulated up here in Pennsylvania.
Right.
So I think he knew that eventually, even if he had success up here, he eventually would have to leave and head back. But if they'd won the war, I'm sure they would have retreated. High cost. Yeah, that's true. But they would have achieved what they were looking for, and that was their independence. So they have no reason to stay here.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. Anything to add to that, Bob?
When I first heard Darth Etzgorn's question, do I get a keg of beer too now? I wanted to just quickly say no. And then I just thought about it for a minute, because she is an intelligent person. And I'm thinking, okay, what
he is an intelligent person.
Okay, well, I wasn't sure. Darth Etzgorn doesn't.
I don't think girls can be Darths in the Star Wars world.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I'm guessing. I'm not into that stuff, but I'm just guessing.
Okay. So anyway, I'm thinking though, what if we had won the Battle of Quebec in the Revolutionary War, when General Montgomery's men had already come up and taken Montreal, and Benedict Arnold's men came up through Maine, and if they wouldn't have been defeated, if they would have won,
right?
Would we then have, in the Treaty of Paris eventually, of course all history would have been different, but would we have said, look, we seized Canada. We're not giving it back to you. That's part of our independence. Because we did that to the Western territories when George Rogers Clark, who was William Clark of Lewis and Clark's older brother,
right?
Which was later their expedition out to the West. Yeah. But George Rogers Clark took a relatively small group of American Rangers and captured some forts in Indiana, like Vincennes and a couple of them out there. We did say, look, our military went out there and seized the Western territories, and in the Treaty of Paris, we kept it. So our original boundary was not the Appalachian Mountains. It extended all the way to the Mississippi River because of a military excursion that happened during a War of Independence. So at first I want to dismiss this question, but then I'm thinking, well, I suppose if the victory was big enough and the North wanted to be done, could they have said, we captured the Cumberland Valley and we're going to keep it?
Yeah.
I doubt it, though. I still doubt it.
Because and
I think what Jim said is to the point. The point
they
was,
don't really want that.
They're not trying to conquer territory. Right. They're trying to win their independence.
Just leave me alone.
Right. And let's say the North agrees to your objective. We're going to let you guys go. We're going to end the war. Go back to the South. You've established your independence. And they say, no, we've conquered this territory. We're not going to leave it. Well, what's the U.S. government going to do? You think they're going to sit there and say, okay. No. They're going to continue the war.
Right.
And so you're almost defeating yourself. Well, you've achieved what you're looking for, but now you refuse to leave, and now they may be coming back after you, and you may get destroyed military and lose everything that you'd aimed for in the first place.
I mean, it almost seems like, am I wrong in characterizing this Lee's push up into Pennsylvania as almost like a scare tactic, like almost kind of like a bluff to get them to all just be okay, we give up, I
wouldn't call it a bluff.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a bluff.
Well, obviously not, because he does
but
it.
it's more of a diversion to some extent.
Okay.
It's taking the theater of war out of Virginia. It's prolonging the war.
Right.
And it's putting a lot of pressure on the U.S. government. And who knows?
So it's just wreaking havoc, basically.
Right. There is that morale aspect. I mean, it might not have been a bluff, because this was a full-scale invasion, the last invasion of the United States in our history, right?
Yeah.
But so I wouldn't call it a bluff, but it was, the morale was one of the prime motivators for him to encourage the peace movement that's growing in the North and all that. Oh. I think what we can say to answer the question is we unanimously say no, and that's a pretty clear. I was just throwing out another but it made me think about the Revolutionary War.
Yeah. So
the difference there, though, Pennsylvania was settled by the United States. There were people who lived here. Out west, of course, it was Native Americans were there, but they didn't like the Americans, whether they were, or the white man, whether they were British or whether they were the United States. They didn't like them, period.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So, okay.
I get a keg of beer.
Well, you'll have to
I don't even drink beer, so yes, I'll share it. I'll give it to you two guys.
Well, you don't drink beer, so might as well give it to me.
Just give it to Jim.
I'll give it to Jim.
Yeah.
And I can nurse that for quite a while. I'll take me through the winter. I'm pretty sure.
And we'll bring it to the Mafia game.
There you go, Bob. I'll go well with the pizza.
The Great Tronetti can't sleep at night until he gets answers to these questions. First, he's wondering about Junius Daniels. There's a lot of S's in there. Junius Daniels' assaults on the first day, and what were their losses? They're spelled incorrectly. Let's start with that one. Daniels' brigade assaults on the first day. What were the losses? That's a good question. We don't get a lot of first day questions, especially not having to do with roads yet. So, roads division. So go ahead.
I did my homework on this one.
Good. Okay, great.
Junius Daniels was part of Rhodes Division that arrived on the first day from the north, seized Oak Hill. And they were part of the attack more in the afternoon. They came south from Oak Hill toward, they're kind of interesting because they get involved in both the fight along the Sheeds Woods, along Oak Ridge, and they also get involved in the fight near the McPherson farm, where the fight had been going on east-west, and of course Rhodes arrives, and now the fighting axis is north-south. And so they kind of split. They come south toward the Chambersburg Road, Route 30 today, and part of the unit makes a left-hand turn and heads toward the Sheeds Woods and kind of helps push Confederate or Union troops that had been fighting up there along Oak Ridge, where the tower is today, back toward the seminary and back toward town. And then other units, I think like the 32nd North Carolina, actually go directly to right over the railroad cut, and go right toward the Chambersburg Road, and then help push the Union troops west of town back toward the seminary.
So they're the ones up against Stone's brigade? Is that right? The 32nd?
On their last attack, and even in the first couple of attacks, they are hitting the 149th Pennsylvania Stone's brigade.
Right.
So they're coming from the north. So those of you who are coming to the battlefield, you go over that modern road that goes over the railroad cut. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you're going the direction of the auto tour, you're heading north as you go over the railroad cut. You would have seen in the afternoon of July 1st to your left, to the west, going over the west arm of McPherson's Ridge, and even on the other side of that would have been the 32nd North Carolina.
Okay.
But coming from the west.
Coming from the north. Coming from the north.
But they get to the Chambersburg Road, and then they kind of turn.
Well, that's the third attack. The first attack, they don't even get to the railroad. They get about to the railroad cut, but they're taking fire from it, so they fall back. Then there's a second attack, and these are all pretty quick order. Okay, this isn't a long period of time we're talking about. And they're coming, again, they're splitting their emphasis. 3 regiments are coming from almost due north to south towards the Chambersburg Pike, and they're hitting the first corps units of Stone's brigade. And then 2 of the regiments have turned, and they're heading east, and they're fighting alongside Iverson's men, what was left of Iverson's men, over by Sheeds Woods. On the third attack, though, now Hill is coming in from the west as well. I mean, not Hill. Harry Heath and Hill, that's Hill's corps, is coming in from the west. Okay, so now this allows all of Daniel to kind of put their emphasis more to the east attack, and they are going to come across to the chambers over the Chambersburg.
They kind of join Hill and his push to the east towards
Hill's
seminary.
left and Daniel's right kind of join, and now they're all pushing to the east.
It's the one brigade that's really in both phases of the fight west of town in the afternoon, because they're curving to the left, and like you said, supporting Iverson's right and getting into the Sheeds Woods. But at the same time, they're also joining the fight by the McPherson Farm, getting close to that and pushing not only south but east.
And when you talk about Sheeds Woods, for the listener, you know where Lee's headquarters is. It's the woods right to the north of that. Between Lee's headquarters and the observation tower.
That's right.
Right.
For those people. Because
visitors might
Is there even there's not a plaque with the name Sheeds Woods on it anywhere in that area?
I don't think there is.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So
today there's a modern, really nice stone house, privately owned.
Oh, love that house.
And that property is Sheeds Woods.
When I make my first $1 million off this podcast, I'm going to buy it from him.
And the Park Road goes through trees where there's modern houses.
Yeah.
That's Sheeds Woods area.
Right.
Now,
okay, go ahead.
Daniel's Brigade. I stopped at the guide library today just to check Busey and Martin's statistics on this. Regimental strengths and losses.
Gary Busey and Dean Martin. Yep.
Anyway, according to them, and this is a pretty recognized authority on strengths and losses and all. Daniels had 2,162 men.
Okay.
At the outset, which is a large number. They lost 950, which breaks down 231 killed, 583 wounded, and 136 missing. And a lot of those would be captured.
How many wounded?
583.
Wow.
So they lost 950 of 2162, which is 43.9%. And just to give you a point of comparison, though, the brigade just above them, Iverson's brigade, lost 62%. Okay. Now, Daniel's brigade is really badly blooded, no doubt about it. And also, you have to take into consideration that Daniel is fighting on the morning of July 3rd. Is he not? Yeah, he and O'Neill. What were the two regiments from Rhodes's division that came over to help at Culp's Hill? It was O'Neill and Daniel.
I believe it was. I know O'Neill was over there.
Do an order of battle check.
I'm looking at it here. 43rd North Carolina is in Daniel's brigade.
Is in Daniel's, okay.
And O'Neill is 3rd, 5th, and 6th Alabama.
Right, so they were in Culp's Hill too. So some of those casualties would have been suffered on the morning of July 3rd at Culp's Hill as well. Although the vast majority, that was a very bloody fight that was going on. You know, we were talking about the color bearers of the 26th and 26th North Carolina, 24th Michigan earlier in this podcast. So we're just, what, Jim, how far north would this be going on at the same time? Daniel's attack is north of Herbst Woods by, what would you say, a quarter of a mile?
You mean where they kind of turn and head east toward the Sheeds Woods?
Let's just say the distance from the 24th Michigan's monument to the railroad cut.
Quarter mile?
Yeah, okay, that's what I would guess too. So
maybe not quite that far.
Right. So my point here is this is a really bloody fight that's going on in the afternoon of July 1st. Okay, so Daniel's losing, 43.9% of his men, most of the men in that attack. And this is not a long period of time either in the afternoon of July 1st when they're attacking.
Go ahead.
Well, I wanted the Great Tronetti to get some sleep, so I did my homework as well. But I went to the official records. All right. And I went to Rhodes's division, and their figures, and they're very similar to yours. Okay. They listed 2,123 present, 2,123 present. Okay. With a casualty figure, I can't remember. I should have wrote it down. It was either 916 or 967. But I got the calculator out, and it comes out at pretty close to 45. I think you said 43%.
That's according to the museum.
So hopefully
the same.
The Great Tronetti, between the two of us, can get some sense.
Thank you, Jim. Well put.
Yes.
What's next, Matt?
Sleep well, Tronetti. Okay, and then he has a more specific question about the 45th New York stand in the town and their losses and what happened. This is another good one here from the Great Tronetti. He's learning, and he is asking good questions. So 45th New York in the town, they made a stand.
Okay, they were part of the 11th Corps, Schimmelfennig's division, I believe, and they were some of the first Union soldiers to come out of town. When Howard came in from the south and dropped off his reserve at Cemetery Hill, about 6,000 of the balance of the soldiers went through town. And these guys basically became the picket line for Howard's men. They were from the first troops north of town. And where they deployed is pretty much north of where Gettysburg College is today, kind of along the Mumminsburg Road. They came out toward the McLean Farm, which is up on Oak Hill. And if you know about Civil War combat, you know that when a regiment, basic fighting unit, goes into a fight, about a tenth of the unit, a company, is sent forward from the main body to form what we call skirmish line. And it's a light line of guys who are spread out. and they're basically sent out to draw the fire of the enemy, which gives you an idea, pins down where the location of the enemy is, and gives you some idea of the strength. And it also acts as a tripwire to warn the main body that something's happening, and it slows the enemy down and gives your main body a chance to brace for the shock of combat. So that's basically what they were doing. Some of the first troops out on the fields north of town on July 1st, and then they end up being some of the last troops to retreat back through Gettysburg. And I was doing a little bit of reading today in the official records, and Adolphus Dobke, I believe, is the lieutenant colonel in command, and he talked about them retreating south through what would be the Gettysburg College campus today.
Okay.
And then sometime when they got either to where the railroad is, back then the railroad tracks hadn't been laid, but the cut had been kind of established from town to the west of town, either there or around the Chambersburg Road. He talks about them making a left and going a couple of blocks. He called them squares, I think. And then they turned left again, which I think was Carlisle Street. And he talked about seeing a barricade that the Confederates had built. And when they did build a barricade thing near where the Lincoln train station and the Lincoln Diner is. And he talked about then at that point, when they tried to turn and go south along where the Baltimore Pike is, that they were nearly cut off because Confederates were coming from the west through like Mill Street and Chambersburg Street. And that he said when he finally got back to Cemetery Hill, they had about a third of the force remaining that had fought on day one with them, 45th New York.
So they come through town. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what you just said there, because I've never heard the story before. Well, I have, but I don't remember. They come through town, and they find when they get to Carlisle Street, that area there, or the square somewhere around there.
Well, that's on the retreat.
Okay.
Initially, they just come through town and deploy to the northwest of town, opposite Oak Ridge, where the Confederates are. At this point, Doles's brigade has not arrived from the north. So the Confederates are just up on Oak Hill, and they're basically just trying to stop, Rhodes' division from making a push toward the town at this point, and allow the bulk of the 11th Corps under Howard, which was only about 6,000 men because he had dropped off 4,000 as a reserve at Cemetery Hill. And they're just kind of going out and feeling the Confederates around where the McLean Farm is today, the Moses McLean Farm, off of the Mummersburg Road along the Oak Ridge, the eastern side.
Right.
The base of Oak Hill.
Okay. Okay. Well, so then...
And then they retreated back the way they came, back toward town. And then he talks about him making a left-hand turn and going a couple blocks. So I've always imagined it somewhere between the railroad, maybe in Chambersburg Street. And then he says they make another left, which I imagine was probably at the square onto Carlisle, where they see this barricade the Confederates had set up. He said they piled up Union bodies or something and were firing. And then they realized they had to retreat back to the south towards Cemetery Hill on Baltimore Street. But now Confederates are coming in from the west. So they're getting cut off, and they end up losing a lot of guys.
Right. Man. I'm looking at Harry Fonce's Gettysburg the first day here, and just picking up on what Jim was saying, it says that the head of the 45th, this is during the retreat, the head of the 45th pushed to Washington Street, where it met a crossfire that wounded Major Charles Koch. That's probably Hill's men are pushing down from the west. Because when you get to an intersection, you get to a road, now there's a clear field of fire. Otherwise, buildings are blocking.
Right.
So it returned to Chambersburg Street and cut south from it on each side of the Christ Lutheran Church.
Oh. Okay.
So that's the church that a lot of you know, just west of the square at Gettysburg.
About a half block west of the square.
Yeah, right. And,
so they cut through alleys, in other words?
Well, yeah, I guess.
It
says
go
over
through
fences, through yards and alleys, and finally to the safety of Cemetery Hill. Okay. While 6 companies escaped, 4 under Captain Ersch, and I want to read something from Coco's book in a minute about Captain Ersch, if I can get my phone back on. Okay, there it is. Captain Ersch to come out and see that the town was firmly in their control. I'm sorry. Let me just pick up Coco now. So Captain Ersch is going to be a Medal of Honor winner. He's from Company D of the 45th New York. It says here, and these are my notes I have, during the retreat at Chambersburg Street, he and about 600 others, Federals, are going to barricade themselves in a block of houses, and this is, I think, right around Chambersburg. I just said that. Firing at the Rebs. It took the Rebs several hours. Okay, they surrounded them. And so the rest of the Union Army is up there at Cemetery Hill and safe, right?
Yeah.
Except for General Alexander Schimmelpfennig, the division commander. He's hiding behind... Garlic House there.
Right.
But anyway, or Garlish, I guess is how you pronounce her last name.
I've heard it pronounced 6,000 different ways.
Right. That's my problem, too.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is from a book called Deeds of Valor published in 1906, and I'm reading it from Greg Coco's On the Bloodstained Field, page 36. Quote, "The Confederates demanded the surrender of the gallant little band. Captain Ersch was permitted to leave the temporary defense under a flag of truce and satisfy himself that no succor was in sight." And SUCCOR, not succor.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Clarify that.
Yeah, there's no you suckers out there. Why are we going to retreat? Why are we going to surrender you? But the Confederates were actually quite nice to them. They were basically saying, look, you got to surrender. You're cut off from the whole rest of your army. Right. You are totally surrounded. And if you don't believe it, we'll let you come out and look.
Yeah.
Look. Yeah, and that's basically what he did. So that's when it says when he saw that there was no succor in... Am I pronouncing that right?
Succor.
Yeah. Succor in sight.
Yeah.
And that further resistance was useless. The men destroyed their arms and ammunition and surrendered.
If you were British, it would be succor.
Okay.
And you know where I think that was, Bob? From what I understand, because I've read that. I'd forgotten that was the 45th New York. But I think they were in buildings that were probably about where Thaddeus Stevens had his logs and where the old Blue Parrot used to be. Very close to where the 7-Eleven and the old Eagle Hotel was.
Yeah, right.
So somewhere on Chambersburg, between the square and Washington
Street. Right, in that block there. Yeah.
That's amazing. When you go through town and, there's all this fighting and all these little stories of whatever have, all occurred in these buildings or around these buildings, in these yards and stuff. And, just life just goes on, and we're driving tractor trailers through town, and people are having dinner at the Parrot and getting drunk. And, it's funny how like absolute scenes of horror and fright. And then next thing you know, you're just having dinner. Right. On a beautiful little patio.
Yeah.
I like to point that defense out because the damn Dutch, as they were called, or the Flying Dutchman,
right.
I like to push against that. And I'll use this Medal of Honor winner, Captain First, as an example of these guys cut off and fighting for hours. It must have been around sundown that they finally surrendered.
Yeah, what are they doing? They're the rear guard.
Yeah.
They're kind of like the 16th Maine up there, by the tower.
Right, and
everybody else is skedaddling.
Weren't they the last unit to leave of Schimmelpfennig's division? I think they're about the last ones to leave, and first to arrive. I think you mentioned that before.
First ones to go out, the last ones to leave.
Right.
Think about that.
Yeah, you're like the sacrifice almost.
Right. Exactly.
Oh man,
so many stories.
And
I know.
All people can say is they ran.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So many stories of valor.
Yeah. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, this was a long one, but I think you enjoyed it. History with Brad, the great History with Brad. He also does Dorsey Pender's voice on the narrative episode number 2, which just came out last night. And he wants to know how prevalent was Lyme disease during the battle. And then the follow-up to that is what illnesses were killing soldiers during the battle. Now, I did a little research. Lyme disease is a 20th century disease.
That's what I thought.
So none. Now, of course, if you Google it, you're going to find, you go look at Wikipedia. I think it was the 1970s when it was first discovered. It wasn't really identified and named until the early 80s. And then, of course, you go down the wormhole and you find that it was, some government created disease on this place called Plum Island. And they thought, what a great way to commit biological warfare without actually using biological weapons. We'll just put it among these ticks. And, it's just so ridiculous. But it's weird because they say it seems to spread out from this Plum Island area. But it was first, I think, discovered in Lyme, Connecticut. That's why it's called Lyme disease. It was not around during the Civil War. So ticks were just a nuisance probably back then. They weren't anything that was going to kill you. What illnesses were killing soldiers during the battle? But I think he means the war. So let's say the war. What were the common illnesses that people had? I mean, I'm thinking one person here, Buford, is going to die before the year is out of something that I've heard other people had. I think Barlow's wife even had this. Was it typhoid?
Typhoid and smallpox were 2 big killers.
Typhoid and smallpox. Yeah, there hasn't been a smallpox vaccine yet, has there?
To my knowledge.
That's going to be, I think, in the 70s, 80s.
And what's really interesting about what this leads into is that a lot of people don't realize this, but for every battle death in the Civil War, 2 people died of disease.
So it was killing more people. Yeah.
And when you think about it, a lot of these soldiers are from rural areas. They grew up on farms. They're not really around a lot of other people. They're not exposed to illnesses as children. They don't build up resistance to it. Yeah. When they join the Army, suddenly they're in amongst a lot of other guys in very unsanitary camps. Yeah. And these diseases just run rampant through the camps.
Yeah. Yeah. If for those of you who are Patreon subscribers, the Dr. Carmichael episode where we talk about we touch on how disgusting the camps were, especially at first before they really started to get strict about where you go take a leak. And little things like, guys would just come out of their tent and pee on the side of it and then go back in or whatever. And they would actually have to have, patrols go around camp, make sure people aren't just dropping trout and pooping on the street or whatever. You have that's going to spread disease, of course. The dysentery, though, was the big one, right?
Yeah, dysentery was very bad.
Yeah,
as well.
And now there's this thing about Lee having. People say dysentery, but was it technically? Do we know? Was it technically dysentery, or was it just kind of like bad fruit that he had?
It could have been.
Yeah, we don't know.
There are reports of soldiers saying that they had seen Lee running behind his tent near his headquarters frequently. So I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know.
I hate to laugh like a 12-year-old at the visual of that, but I could. I just do sometimes.
Well, that's the reality.
It is, yeah.
And I'll tell you something.
We've all been there.
Do you know when toilet paper was invented?
I'm going to guess it wasn't around then.
1860.
Oh, really?
So it's new at that time. I probably shouldn't go down this road.
Go. It's real.
Make people realize, do you think they were carrying toilet paper with them on the march? And I'm getting in this to say, today we have a lot of luxuries that we just kind of take for granted.
Right.
And we talk about the bravery of the soldiers and everything they endured during battle. But I think sometimes the more inspirational thing for me is just the daily life, the marches and the conditions in the camp. There's no toilet paper. So
what would they do? Just rip a page out of a book or newspaper or something? Leaves?
Leave a corn stalk, maybe?
No, you're not changing your underwear a whole lot. So,
oh my God!
Yeah, I'm sorry to be graphic.
No. But this is what I want. I want people to hear all this stuff because it's real.
Well, when you think about their daily life and what they went through apart from the battle, to me that inspires me as much sometimes as what they did in the battle.
It inspires me to take a shower.
Yeah. Or clean your underwear.
If I can come back to the question of the disease that's the most deadly, I would say that the percentage of chance that you're going to die from the following disease was the greatest of any. Flag fever.
Flag fever.
The desire to either carry your flag in battle or to capture the enemy's flag.
Okay.
It was almost always fatal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I mean, earlier on when you were reading about all the flag bearers of the 26th North Carolina, obviously, I don't know, after what is probably, sounds like it's about after a dozen people start realizing, maybe I shouldn't do this. I don't know. That's crazy. Well, listen, we hope that none of you out there have any diseases right now, and that you'll be around for the next one. By all means, anytime. You don't have to wait for me to put out a call for an Ask a Guide. If you have any questions you want for Ask a Guide, just let me know and I'll compile them and we'll ask them at some other point in the future. Also, speaking of which, I forgot to mention this at the top of the show, but if you ever want to take a tour with any one of the guides that you hear here on Ask a Guide, please email me, Matt@addressinggettysburg.com. Bob, you had our first response to that.
You had a wonderful time with a wonderful family. I'm not allowed to say their name, but I would love to, just because they have kids and they don't want to know.
The Trump family. It was the Trumps. Yeah.
It was a wonderful family.
Bob, you're a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guy. Magnificent. I can't do Trump. Anyway.
That sounds pretty good.
So, no. Yeah, you had they were actually on the way to Gettysburg. See, this is how it works, folks. This isn't a joke. They were on the way to Gettysburg listening to the overview episode that Bob and I did months ago and said, I'd like to take a tour with this guy. And they emailed me from the car asking, do you think you could set us up with Bob this weekend? And I happened to have been with Bob at that moment when it came in, and we set it up, and Bob went and had a tour with them the next morning, and they loved it, and you loved it, and there was just love all around, ladies and gentlemen, love all around. We're a bunch of hippies over here.
Let me say, though, that any licensed battlefield guide that you would get a tour from,
it is true,
you would think was the greatest thing.
It is true.
So,
but they were
I'm just one
listening.
Of 155.
They happened to be listening to us talking. It was the first thing that they had listened to, and they liked what you were saying. That's all. Yeah, that's it. So thank you all for listening to this one. Thank you all for the Patreon support. Thank you for everything. Everything is going well, and I have all of you to thank for that. Not anything I do. So, and thank you to the guides, Bob. Thank you, Jim. And we will see you all.
And thanks for listening, everybody. Goodbye.
You never let me get the last word.
Well, I'm afraid you're not going to let me say goodbye to people because you never do.
Okay.
Bye, people.
We're gonna work this out. Next time,
Jim,
we're going to get it right.
Goodbye before Matt gets it right?
Anything else?
I'll take the last word.
Okay.
Goodbye.